Welcome back to episode 96. Today's guest is Hugo. Hugo is one of my yellow belts, soon to be orange belt, as we mentioned. Unfortunately, we had to reschedule his test due to injury. He's also a programmer working for Activision, I believe he mentioned, and he is the founder of Peace, People Ensuring Animal Care Exists. It's a not-for-profit relocation program for animals that need homes, particularly farm animals, but I'll read more about that. Hugo's story is quite interesting in that he came originally from a Buddhist background, from a perspective, not as a child, he's originally from South Africa. He found Buddhism, and through a Buddhist organization and their training, found Krav Maga. And we go into depth quite a lot about his background on this. But here's something he said that I thought was very interesting.
How I like to approach it, that is like you need to be acquainted with violence and how that functions in order to actually have a proper relationship to it. Not that you're going to be like, just tossing and becoming a more violent and aggressive person, but you need to have a relationship to it. So, that's the same thing with, if we're talking firearms, there's that's a thing in Buddhist thought and philosophy is around, there's a notion called weapon principle, right? Just like if somebody is standing there and like brandishes a sword and holds it high in the sky, like people are going to react in turn. There's a certain energy that happens there. So it's like relating to that. It's like, let's rather actually have a relationship to it than just like shy away.
Buddhism allows for self-defense. Didn't you know that? It's actually, a lot of people don't know that. I believe there's a quote from the Dalai Lama even saying, yes, you can defend yourself if it's a matter of life or death, or you need to. I'm going to be real quick. I'm going to try to shorten my intros about this podcast is brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions since 2013. If you want to come train with us in person in the Metro Vancouver area, urbantacticskm.com. And we do not discriminate. If you know what that means, then great. If you don't know what that means, well, we don't discriminate. So all is welcome. urbantacticskm.com. We also offer the Canadian Firearms Safety Course, Canadian Restricted Firearms Safety Course. The next course may or may not be listed. You can go to our website, the CFSC/CRFCSC tab, and you can see when the next course is and sign it up. It's required for your Canadian firearms license, or if you just want to educate yourself. There is that. You can also check out UTKMblog.com, where we have our curriculum every Mondays posted for our students, and you can follow along. The podcast, older episodes are all there, and blog posts. I do hope more people are willing to contribute, because this is for all Krav Maga practitioners and martial artists. So, if you have stories to do with self-defense situations, martial arts training, or would like to contribute a series, please submit it, info@urbantacticscanada.com. Any submissions that we do accept, you'll be given 3 months free on UTKMU.com. So, UTKMU.com is where I post the videos of our online curriculum. Right now, only beginner and novice curriculum. There is a little bit of free stuff there, but not too much, although one of the free stuff that's important is some videos I prepared for firearm safety, so that's free. Everything else will be paid access. I will have a filming studio sort of soon, so I'll be able to update a lot of those videos soon, and it'll be much better website moving forward. But for all my students who need to review the curriculum or aren't available to train right now, or for any Krav Maga practitioners who simply want to update their perspective or learn a new way of teaching things or whatever, utkmu.com. Again, I do plan on expanding that website extensively. This year has been a rough one. I am sure you all know why. You can also follow us for free on Urban Tactics Krav Maga at Instagram and Facebook, and on Urban Tactics KM at Twitter. And if you're really feeling generous, you can go to urbantactics.utkmblog.com and hit the support us link, and you can simply donate if you want. Or if you want something for your money, you can go to utkmu.com or come train with us. Again, we do not discriminate. I think I got that. So a little bit more about Hugo. Again, he's a programmer working for Activision, originally from South Africa. We actually do talk about apartheid in South Africa and comparative what's going on in North America and perspectives. But I just want to go back. So the Buddhist organization he belonged to is called Shambhala. making enlightened society possible. This is off their website, shambhala.org. So just what it says here, Shambhala takes its name from legendary kingdom famous for being enlightened society. Today, the global Shambhala network brings together people of all ages from all walks of life who are interested in exploring our minds, transferring our experiences, and awakening our potential for enlightened society. Shambhala is based on trust in human dignity. We offer a path of meditation, practice, and contemplative arts oriented towards modern life. Our communities around the world cultivate kindness, bravery, genuine dialogue. Our vision is to inspire compassionate, sustainable, and just human society. Probably why Hugo has the patience to listen to me half the time, even though, as he mentions, we don't always agree. Now, the Vancouver chapter, vancouver.shambhala.org, particularly where Hugo found it. So it just says on their website, Vancouver Shambhala Center is a Buddhist meditation center offering community grounded in a warm approach to the study and practice of meditation. We provide instructions in mindfulness, awareness, meditation for beginners and experienced practitioners, a diverse variety of evening and weekend programs, as well as public group meditation sessions, etc. And then, as he mentions in the podcast, a lot of these Buddhist monks actually need security, particularly those who have Tibet origins, due to the ominous presence of certain dictatorial countries who dislike them. So they have a wing of branch that is about military training for purposes of legitimate security concerns, and it's called Dorje Kasang. So the website dk001.kasang.org. Right, so what it says here, the Dorje Kasang Protector Principle. The teachings held by the Shambhala Mandala are presented within the container of wakefulness. The creation and maintenance of the container is Protector Principle. Within the mandala, the practice of Protector Principle is shared by all, but is particularly associated with the Dorje Kasang. The Dorje Kasang is modeled after the ancient tradition of Dharma protectors. Its members are trained in protecting the space in which practitioners are able to hear and practice the teachings. The protection extends to the teacher who is presenting the teachings themselves, and the community who practice the teachings. The term Dorje Kasang itself means indestructible. Dorje, command, Ka, protector, Sang. Indestructible refers to the indestructibility of space, complete openness that cannot be destroyed or defeated. Ka, or command, refers to the teaching of the lineage which presents the truth of things as they are and the possibility of establishing an enlightened society. The motto of the Dorje Kasang is victory over war. In the context, war is an ongoing struggle with the three poisons identified by the Buddha: passion, aggression, and ignorance. Victory is willingness to face these three poisons directly, wielding the weapons of insight and loving kindness. As part of their practice, the Dorje Kasang wears uniforms to communicate delight in the disciplines of egolessness and simplicity, service to others by being present and available to help, and commitment to the continuous path of wakefulness and meaning, care, dignity, mindfulness, and awareness. Very interesting. Through that, he wanted to expand his ability to defend himself and his teachers and his principles that he learns and grows, and he found Krav Maga. And it's a very interesting path to Krav Maga, but it's a path nonetheless. Hugo also, and he tells the story of his animal care, not-for-profit, people ensuring animal care exists. Again, peacecanada.org. Learn about vision and mission. Let's go here. I'll just read a little bit about it. Peace Vision is a compassionate world for all sentient beings, supported by the ethics of veganism and modeled by sustainable farm sanctuaries. Peace Mission is helping farmed animals in farm sanctuaries through resource rescue and education. So Hugo very much embodies the Buddhist principles in his day-to-day life, though I'm not sure how that works at Activision. In this podcast, we talk a whole bunch about just this. You never, the Forrest Gump quote, life is like a box of chocolate, you never know you're going to get. Well, you never know what you're going to get with this podcast. This episode is exceptionally existential. So we start off, he talks about his Buddhist practices and how it relates to martial arts and learning martial arts. We talk about Gamergate in the gaming world, as he does work heavily in the gaming world and has for many years. We talk about veganism, the ethics behind that, a lot of ethics and morality of what it means to be human, because we both agree that factory farming is probably evil at this point. I choose to hunt to get a lot of my meat, or get ethically sourced meat when I'm able to. He chooses veganism. So, though the problem is the same, solutions are two different things. So much discussion about what it means to be human in this podcast, and the ethics and morals and quandaries of the human experience. We talk about a whole wide variety of things that I can't even remember at this point. But this was definitely a very good conversation. So have a listen. Krav Maga is not just a self-defense system. It is a way of life. Warrior's Den is a podcast for Kravists, fighters, martial artists, warriors, politicians, and general citizens. Consider this. The society that separates scholars from its warriors will have its thinking done by cowards and its fighting done by fools. Lucidity. Your host, Jonathan Fader, talks to guests in an open and uncensored format about their fights, their philosophies, and their lives. No topic is taboo, and the conversation may start in one place and end in another. As the quote suggests, you cannot separate the warrior from the politics and the world around them, as a true warrior must be a student in all forms of art and science.
You're listening to The Warrior's Day. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.
Welcome back. I'm here with Hugo, a UTKM yellow belt, and soon to be orange belt.
Working on it.
Yeah, we had to postpone due to injury. It happens. Let's just start with how you got into martial arts, your journey, and
sure.
and then how you decided to come to Krav Maga, and
sure.
from there.
Yeah, I mean, I have a decent sports background. I always did a whole bunch, either running, rugby, cross country, swimming, whatever. But I didn't have any martial arts background as a kid. But actually, I came to Krav Maga through meditation, which I think is kind of an interesting path.
Definitely.
But yeah, the group and the practice that I did for meditation was there's actually an aspect of it that there's a kind of a group that they call the Dorje Kasang, and that's for the teacher that came over. He actually fled Tibet in the late 50s, 60s. And as he came to North America, he realized this is straight up in like hippie time, and trying to get his students to actually do anything didn't really work well. So he formed, it's like quasi security service, with one of the aspects is like making things function when they have to run events, that there are people there, but also actually just getting people to not just lounge around and have some discipline. So I actually participated in that. So the interesting part of how to run that is like, now you're in this meditation practice, but you're dealing with security, you're dealing with like physical space, you're dealing with all of those aspects. And he actually borrowed a chunk from military tradition, like in the group. So we have like a quasi-military structure. And
for like meditation, or like I'm missing something here.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Some context about this whole situation.
I'm running a bit fast through but this is the group that did the actual meditation practice, or that group is called Shambhala, but this section that's more like the security aspect, that was called the Dorje Kasang, and that's the part that has this kind of military influence.
So is it like just teaching security stuff, or were you doing like security as a job?
Yeah, it's within, like when events run within the centers, like if a visiting teacher comes, then we would do things like you do driver's escort and practice.
It's like VIP sort of stuff.
Exactly.
Because the Buddhist monks from Tibet sometimes need protection from certain countries and stuff.
It's that, as well as just from like we need to get people from A to B and orient the space and whatever. So that was kind of an interesting thing, because now you're dealing with, you have what you would think of, how do those two worlds kind of collide with like security and having like a military influence in it. And the for that, the Dorje Khosang, that group, it actually was trying to figure out how do you deal with a situation of like military influence, but you're still kind of working with that as a meditation practice as well. And the one kind of tagline or kind of slogan that goes with it of the group is victory over war, which is interesting, but it's talking more about the notion of aggression, right? So like how are you of service in a way that you don't get caught up on the ego and bullshit that can come from like power tripping and that situation. So that's kind of the practice. And but then for me the thing that contrasted with that is like when we talk about Krav Maga, we talk about it as an aggressive style. Like there is that notion of expedience, of actually dealing with the situation quickly and ending it. And for me the contrast was between like the non-aggression or victory over aggression, like, and not getting sucked into that, but that's kind of your mental state, but dealing with the physical aggression and how those two line up to each other. So that's actually what drew me in, to kind of just experiment with that basically. And that was like 4 years ago.
And how long were you doing the meditation security group thing?
I think probably started with that around like 2007, 8, something like that. So a good chunk of years.
Yeah, because I remember when you first came, you were like, "Hi," like very strict, and Krav Maga tends to be more casual in that way.
Yeah.
As far as the contrast, I don't see anything wrong. It's like inner peace and outer peace.
Yeah.
You need physical conflict for outer peace sometimes, but you use the inner peace to try to avoid it. It makes sense.
And that's basically it, right? That you're in dealing with a situation, if you're going to lose your mind, you're going to and be totally like raged out, you're not going to be effective in dealing with something anyway. So that's been my experience. If you're talking about Krav, is like you need to actually, like we work with in the Dorje Khosang, it's like we work with Cooper's color codes, right? We work with that, like how do we relate to what your physical situation is versus your mental state. So exactly that. It's like I think people get the assumption of violence, aggression, whatever, and you see the roided out type idea, and people have those connotations, but not actually.
YouTube doesn't help with all its videos.
For sure. And I think, that's been my experience. There's more. You start to actually sense the notion of camaraderie and people actually helping each other out, and the sense of community that forms there, which was that's different from what some of the outward perception can be. So that's kind of my approach. Is I'd rather experiment and like go into something and get that perspective than just kind of look at the outside and.
Well, that is scientific method. Go in and see what's going on. It's heavily bastardized by a lot of people for all sorts of ulterior motives, but you can still do it on a personal level. Yeah. So. Is there like a specific reason you got into the meditation?
Yeah, sure. The kind of setup was like I'm from South Africa originally, and South Africa is I would call it culturally Christian, right? So I kind of got brought up in that, and then at some point in my own personal journey, that didn't. You start questioning things and digging into things. I'm like, this doesn't align with my experience of the world, and so went away from that. And for some time, and then actually at where I went to school, the program at BCIT UBC, there was somebody in my kind of student study group, friendship circle, that he was a member of that meditation group. I had done already by that time some kind of comparative religious studies and delved into that, and I had a draw to Buddhism as not a less for the religious aspect and more for something that's just pragmatic. Like you're using whatever the practices are there, but not getting too caught up in like the theism and all of that. It's just there's a tool there. So with chatting with Ken, who was from the center, I was like, all right, they have an open house type thing, so I'll go and check it out. And it functioned for me because it's like like Shambhala as a whole, is less about that religious aspect. It's specifically intended as like there's benefit to meditation practice, like mindfulness meditation, for just regular secular applications. And recognizing like we don't in North America, Western world, we don't have the luxury of just going off for a month or a year or 10.
Not anymore. You do, but you probably get chased off someone's land or something here.
Well, and it's a luxury to be able to do that, right?
Which is ironic, right?
Yeah, we need to be able to support our families, work, eat, whatever. So it's, you know, it's a practice that is taking that into account. Is like, how do you in your daily life actually find space for that? So it almost has, like, if you look at the you know, the saying, analogy, whatever, it's like, if you want to change the world or fix the world, start by doing the dishes, right? It's that type of,
like with Jordan Peterson, the bed.
Exactly. It's the same type of idea. It's like, you need to look for opportunities where you are and not just shirk those responsibilities, because like that's not actually being of use in the world. So
well, it's like, you know, I used to do the go. Now, if I had some sort of rewards coming back for all that work, I might have kept doing it, but I realized I was just burning out, and like I'm totally okay with sitting and doing nothing, or I don't know if I do fully. We're right next to the street here. Hopefully, I'm moving soon. It'll be much quieter. But sorry, what was I saying? That was very distracting.
Go, and you're, you know,
and just the realization that I need to chill a bit, because I burn out really fast. You know, it's part of the reason I don't work a full-time job working for other people, because for me mentally I can do it, but I'm very unhappy because I'm just going at my limits constantly, which is obviously causes an issue in an expensive city like Vancouver. But I made that choice a long time ago. Like, I'd rather be happy. Which is hard for people nowadays.
Totally. And I mean, I think I have a similar approach. Like, my family, we have that kind of, you know, the driven and workaholic type background. And my dad, he ended up shifting away from, or breaking from his one of his most recent jobs when he had a heart attack. So it took him getting to that point. So for myself, it's like I had the same approach. And my experience is the people that are able to keep driving hard like that, right? What was I going to say?
That can keep going like
that. It was kind of what you were saying, that you're able to push yourself, but you recognize that you shouldn't, and what the effects are, because you can keep going to the point that you just destroy your body. But for me, when I started my career, you're jazzed and you have all sorts of initiative and you do the same thing. And it took me getting to like a point of initial burnout as well. But fortunately I had a partner that's like, well, this is bullshit. Like, don't do this to yourself. And was able to shift as well. It's like, I made a very similar decision, that, you know, I could, what is the point of trying to drive to whatever this fantasy level of quote unquote success is? And had the same drive that I'm like, I want to do well. I enjoy working. I enjoy like solving problems and being effective and doing all of those sorts of things. But I need to also like take care of myself and not just keep going for the sake of like, well, I need to achieve. It's like, it's busy work for the sake of just keeping going, as opposed to having an objective.
Well, I mean, I think, you know me in class, I'm very against the blind positivity mentality, because it drives people to believe things that are false. For example, like Kevin Hart, for example, is a very hardworking person, but you see the energy that guy has, and some people are just like that. And if I recall, there is a gene, who knows, because I could have been already out of date information, a gene that some people just don't need sleep. And if you look at people like him or some of these high performing people, they're like, I sleep 4 to 6 hours a week. I'm totally fine. Or a night, sorry, not a week.
That'd be impressive.
And they're like, I'm fine. I can't do that. And then for me, like, I know I start doing this thing where I can have, if I got good sleep and everything's all right, I can work hard, focused for 4 to 6 hours on a good day, if nothing distracts me. Right. And let's say you're reading these motivational things and they're like that. And then what ends up happening is a lot of people burn out because they themselves, for whatever reason, their physiology, whatever, just can't handle it. And everyone is told, if you believe you can do, and then you try to be the next Elon Musk, it's like, no, there's only one of him. And you need to see what your limit. That's what I was saying the other day about testing. Is you need, if you've only ever been an office worker, you need to find out what your physical and mental limits, because you need to know where that bar is, and you need to know how far you can go past it. Because when, say, like the Navy SEALs or people like that are like, you don't know your limits, it's because people have never tested themselves. It does not mean, and it's misinterpreted this way, you should always be at your limits and always push yourself and keep going. And people end up doing that. And my example for that is David Goggins.
Right.
He's a psychopath. He's very motivational. He's great, but look at all the damage he's done to his body.
Yeah.
How many times he's been hospitalized, how many relationships he's destroyed to achieve those goals. And by all means, if he's happy doing that, great. But when you're giving out these motivational, you just can do it. It's a bullet, get off your ass and do it. And some people are happy doing that, but if you're destroying every other thing in your life, you just need to understand you're doing that.
Right.
Like he doesn't seem to care about it, but you know.
If it's a conscious decision, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's I can't remember who I was speaking with, but they were talking about, folks that do Ironman, that they work up towards that.
Yeah.
Like you're either single or divorced, or you start married, but you end up divorced by the time you get to it, right? Yeah. So, and if that's your objective, fine. But I'm like, that's not what I want, you know. So, I do that in my work. I do that in fitness. So I don't have a goal to really push myself to some crazy level. It's like I run, 10Ks a few times a week, and I go for runs, and I do my little morning exercise routine. But that works for me, right? Yeah. And in work, there are times when I'll push myself when I need to get something delivered, and
Crunch
that's fine.
time.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll do that for a bit, and then I'll just like screw off for a couple of days.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I can do that.
One day. Well, that's one of the most positive things I think came out of COVID, because I've been saying this for years, is that a lot of jobs don't really need the person in the office all the time, and a lot of people have responded with, I'm so much happier working from home.
Right.
On a positive note, people are more efficient. They can work at their own pace. They're not on someone else's sort of schedule, depending on the job. Mm-hmm. However, the lack of social interaction can be an issue, but objectively, the reason why people are getting more stuff done is probably because they're not distracted with the social interaction.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I had for work for myself. I had when we started doing when we started working from home for this. I still had the feeling, vibe, whatever. Like due to what I do, I have somewhat of a leadership position within our team, and I'm a contact point for other teams in the company. And we would at times have, we would call them drive-bys, right? That somebody else from a team just comes and asks a question, or he picks something up at lunch chat or whatever. And they're things that I actually need to try to get ahead of. Mm-hmm. So I was concerned I would miss out on that sort of thing. Yeah. But there's like, by shifting to everybody working in a distributed way, you force those kind of lines of communication to be more formalized, right? Mm-hmm. And to actually get it going. When my view on that has shifted a bit, where just naturally, like I shifted my workday to start earlier, so that now I've got a couple of hours over lunch, and I go and take the kids to go swim. Yeah. Or that's when I take my 10K or run or a 20K bike or whatever. Yeah. So that's the flexibility I've been afforded now, and I'd be very hard pressed to give that up.
Yeah. Right? Then commute time as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I have a bit of a balance, because like when the weather's decent, I bike to work. So that's my exercise.
Depends how
now.
Far. Too far for me.
Well, I mean, I started with when I was working in Burnaby, and then I was doing about like 17K back and forth, so it's like 30K or whatever a day. And now I'm at about 38K away, but I built up to do that. So I bike in for an hour.
So what you're saying is when you do the Greenbelt test, I probably can't keep up. If you don't know, he's very tall, lanky legs, has really, really good cardio. Yeah. I was saying one day I'll have students who can outrun me for that. I'm quick, but I'm not like fast.
We'll see. I was shooting for that. I was thinking when we got to Greenbelt, I'm like, can I just like sprint this? I should work up before the test and see how like flat out I could do it.
It was you and Nate, who was on a previous episode, just like booked it, I think, right?
Yeah. Well, I had with Petra's, when I was along for her test, I was kind of cruising it. It was just for this one now for Carches. I was like, I didn't do the run because I was still nursing this.
Oh yeah, who someone ran with him? Just going. It's like, oh okay, I'll have to get in shape for that test so I can keep up.
Or send one of the other lanky dudes along with.
Well, if I can't keep up with a student, which is great, I'll just start your timer, go use them, or I'll yell at you when to turn around.
Yeah, your integrity is part of the test.
That was one of the things. Other thing with those limits, and I talk about this all the time. Like, no matter how hard I train and push myself, for example, a 2-kilometer a me breaking a 7-minute 2K, it's not happening.
Right.
For me, it's just not going to happen. I've tried. The closest I got was like I think 7:15, 7:20, and that's in my peak shape.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the realization, like, you're never going to be that super athlete that you want to be. So you have to compensate, figure out how to work with that. And a lot of people can't realize, okay, this is actually kind of the best I can do, and accept that, you know.
Well, and I think work out what you want to get done, because this year, for instance, like the longest bike ride I've done so far has probably been a 60K, and I wanted to do like some century rides or whatnot. So I'm like, cool, this year things are opened up. I'm starting to bike more. I'll shoot for that. But then it flipped to, it's like, well, hey, do you want to get your belt test done? I'm like, oh shit, I should work on my cardio.
Yeah.
And with the amount of time that I have available to go for a run or a bike ride, me going for an hour run works my stamina better than going for an hour bike ride.
Yeah.
Just personally. Yeah. So I'm like, well, let's shift that goal, and now we'll just do this. So there's like, I've never wanted to bulk up too much because I enjoy running and biking, right? And I shouldn't be too skinny because I want to actually be able to take care of myself. So,
hilarious. I'm not going to name names. Yeah. They're having issues with that, realizing they need their cardio up dramatically, and they usually lift. So it's like, they're making that probably went out now to do that. So it's
so it's an, what your objectives are. So it's and same thing in you can extend that out to your life. It's like I had to for a while figure out, well, there's things that I want to do with work. There's time I want to spend with the kids. I've got Krav. I want to get general fitness. I have studies that I want to do for work. And so I ended up having to actually slot out, well, Monday night is like, I'm going to do some studying on software development languages. And then like Tuesday, I'll take a break. And then, this night. So I have to be regimented with myself to kind of get to a balance and not just get sucked into one thing and everything else drops away.
Yeah. So. Now, was that, going back a bit, the only martial arts experience, or did you have previous ones?
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, the my sports, athletics, whatever exposure has basically been cross country, a lot of rugby, cricket, swimming,
but still athletic overall. Because it's interesting, like you're in programming and whatnot, that being athletic and getting into that, or athletic oriented. Because the stereotype is
like the nerd in the basement. Yeah. I don't know. I felt that shifted over the last while, like the last few years.
Because all the nerdy longevity people are pushing in culture in the IT world.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, but I think there's people have kind of realized. I think there's two things. One is like the nerds got cool, kind of to a degree. So there's that aspect, like socially, and the other piece is just people realizing they can dig so far into those hobbies and tech and the intellectual side, but it's like, I need to step away. There's almost a trope now of like the majority of people that go pretty far in tech just want to like get enough money to fuck off and go live in the mountains, and
which one of the founders of Google just bought some huge property in New Zealand because apparently, according to the best places to live in the apocalypse, that was the best place because it's a self-sustaining island where not many people live and it's hard to get to. Yeah, so they disappeared there.
So I mean, you see a lot of people in tech, like especially in the security field. There's a hell of a lot of people that are heavy into jiu-jitsu, that are hiking, biking, whatever. Yeah. So I think there's a better balance there now.
Than just sitting with the staring at the computer.
Yeah, like the stuck in the basement. I mean, we do that too, right? But maybe we don't do too well with moderation. We go too far into everything.
Well, I was listening to Andrew Huberman's podcast, the Huberman Lab, and he was talking about that actually in order to compensate, you need vistas. So you need if you have a computer that's in front of your screen all the time, it's going to screw up your vision. But if you say like had a window there where you look out the window and look into the distance periodically, then it'll actually correct it or prevent that loss from happening. And what I sort of got out of it was, no matter how technologically advanced and how our society is now, our bodies are still designed to be outside.
Yeah, well, or at least have balance. I mean, I think there's a degree which if just physiologically, if you force your eyes to focus 40 centimeters in front of you, they're going to do that. Yeah. Right. And that's what it's going to shift towards. So it's like I had to recently did like corrective laser video.
Yeah, I did that a long time ago. It was a great choice.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I did it because I got tired of when I'm playing around with my kids that I have to watch my glasses or they kick me in the face. And if you've had somebody smack your glasses into your face, it sucks. So that was the primary driver.
Yeah.
And, running and biking and whatever. So.
Yeah. Now, with that being said, when did you move here from South Africa?
97.
97.
Yeah. So we had actually, I was born 85, and so I was about 12 when we moved. We actually had, funny enough, in my sister's kind of close friendship circle, there was like a group of 4 friends. One of them moved to New Zealand, and 2 of them moved to Canada before we had gone. And my parents honestly had their view was, if it was just them, they'd be fine. They were well established.
A lot of people like that,
yeah. And like at the time, the question for them was, if we stay here, are our kids going to have the opportunity to leave and go somewhere else if they want? Are they going to have like the international recognition for the schooling system and be able to emigrate and whatnot? So that was kind of their the driving factors with that. So we came in 97 when I was 12. So I came here in middle school. My sister's a couple of years older than me through high school.
Is that I guess right after apartheid fell?
Yeah, the election was 94.
Yeah.
My mom actually was a volunteer, helped out at one of the election, like the polling stations and such. And then 95 was when the World Cup came, so that's kind of when the embargo on sports dropped. So that was a huge moment.
Yeah.
We actually had all of our family came to our house to watch the World Cup final in 95, South Africa versus New Zealand. But my dad had for years and years, it had been like a dream of his to actually come to North America to travel around. So we had our flights booked the day of the final. Everybody were there. We had to the game ended up going to like 2 or 3 overtimes. And we had to go and shower and get ready for the flight. And like as soon as the game was over, we won. We're like, celebrate! Okay, get out. We're leaving.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that because that like the timing of that, like shortly after that, moving then to Canada as a young kid must have been like crazy.
Honestly, I think the thing that I realized afterwards, I was young enough that I didn't pick up on all of the implications.
Yeah.
And it took me time through high school and such to really start to kind of piece that all together.
Yeah.
The only things that I really remember that were relevant, stood out, whatever, was there was a concern about like how things were affecting the education system at that time. Because the challenge is you're taking a country that had like minority rule for so long, and you're trying to get things corrected. That's going to be bumpy, right? And
it's not ended up so great now.
Yeah,
from what I can tell.
I mean, it's you're going to have at least I think a generation or two to try and settle things out. But there's going to be a risk of how much do you have at times that are so dynamic and there's that disruption. Is there going to be
siren wise?
There's room for corruption to take place. There's room for all of that, and it's I don't think there's an easy way out of that. I think it's like the rip the Band-Aid type thing. You have to go through it and figure out where you're going to land up on the other side.
Yeah. Well, that's they talk about generational trauma these days, but I'm like that. If that concept applies to everything, is that for like education purposes to get a generation up to where we would all like to be.
Yes.
It's going to take like 3 generations of consistent education and development and whatever. Exactly
that. I mean, that was something that for myself, when, people ask me that question, I'm like, you're literally looking at a massive population that has been wronged for a long period of time, but denied access to education. So I think that you need to, it's going to take time to sort out how things shake out. And, like I said, I don't think it's going to be clear because you're going to need to right wrongs that had occurred, but then you have examples of how things went horribly sideways in Zimbabwe as well.
Yeah.
And, there's paths that you could tread that
sideways everywhere.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Like for me, I obviously not growing up in that. I grew up here. It's pretty sick. I grew up after, like, Vancouver notoriously was actually very violent in like the 70s in the eastern part of Vancouver. I grew up in Richmond. So when I was born, it was basically mostly farmland.
Right. Yeah.
And now it's a giant block of cement. So I grew up with diversity my whole life. Didn't think much of it.
Right.
Like I never cared anything like that.
Yeah.
And like from when people make accusations of like, you know, apartheid about like what's going on in America now, I'm talking about today, not a long time ago, or like in Israel. What do you think, like kind of like that? If because you grew up sort of in it.
You mean like comparing some of the
like, do you think it's a fair comparison when they do that, based on someone who kind of lived?
I see. Well, I mean, I think that what you're probably dealing with in the States compared to South Africa is in the South African example, you had the minority rule tossed out, and there's chunks of, say, like affirmative action and other pieces that shifted that power dynamic.
Yeah.
I don't think you've not had the same in the States. Like, you've had chunks of what the segregation was torn down, but then you still had, and I'm not properly familiar with American politics and history, but you still had things like Jim Crow, you still had things like redlining, you still had those practices that still kept people down in not straightforward ways, but that hampered actual equality, and you had a massive leg up for people that were not subject to that. So I don't think I think part of the history might be somewhat equivalent, that you had suppression, but again, I think in the States, like, you had a majority population that had like enslavement and oppression of a group, and then that was like, okay, well, I guess we have to get rid of that. But then you still had power concentration within that group. Whereas in South Africa, like, that flipped. You had minority rule that was chucked out, and now the power balance shifts, right? And so I don't think that they map one to one. So
because it's like, hypothetically, obviously it's not working the way. Hypothetically, if a minority group is oppressed, it should be easier to integrate and build up a society. Hypothetically, obviously, that is not gone how it is. Than say a largely uneducated, oppressive majority that has to make that shift.
Right. But I think that the challenge though is that for the minority group, like, you now are. If let's say you have segregation drop out, you have integration, but you're integrating into somebody else's system, into somebody else's house. You know, so I think there's more room for them to still set the rules, and not
in South Africa.
No, I mean I'm talking about in the States, right? Because if you're the minority group that now is like, well, we're not going to fully discriminate against you with or there's some measure of emancipation, but you're still stepping into the space that somebody else controls. There's not, I think, like in the South African example, like an actual handover of power.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I hate it when people throw words around without fully understanding.
Yeah, I mean, apartheid just means separation, right? But I think that perhaps, you know, delineating those as segregation in the States versus apartheid, like, it helps conceptualize them as two different things. Yeah. Because I think they have some different characteristics.
It's like when people call Israel an apartheid state. I'm like, I roll my eyes at that. Yeah, there's physical walls, but people forget, like, when they did those, the crime and murder and all that went down, like, dramatically.
Yeah, I mean, and that's an area that I'm woefully, I catch little bits and pieces.
Yeah, but most people are not very informed.
Yeah, so I catch bits from yourself, and then I try and you know, catch bits from other sources. But it's something that, like, I don't want to step into a space where I'm like, I'm going to have an opinion on this. I'm like,
which is really probably the best place, because I mean, I know people that are like pro BDS, which is the anti-Israel, but I'm like, do you understand that actually hurts the Palestinian more? Because what companies will do is, if they have like SodaStream had like 1,000 worker factory in the West Bank. Oh, I see. Okay. Right, and then people who support that, because apartheid state, as they claim, and then they cave to public pressure. All they do is move the factory into the other part of Israel. They do this all the time, like Ben and Jerry, the same shit. Yeah. So now you've just screwed the Palestinian people who were making better wages doing that, working for that Western company, than they ever would. Right. Now, I believe in that case, Israel gave everyone who was working there passports or whatever, so they could go and work in the new place.
Yeah.
But that's not always the case, because it really depends, and it's a hassle for everyone, and it's a legitimate security as to why they need the checkpoints. And people who say they don't, it's like, hey, just, if you go like 10 years without people constantly trying to stab someone, I guarantee you they ease off. They always ease off. And then when they ease off for a long period of time, and then violence comes back, well, they go right back.
Yeah, I mean, I think in any, it would be in my mind, if you're going back to the South Africa example, it's like if you're just going to something blind and you try and apply a policy without realizing there are human dynamics involved here. I mean, that's like South Africa had the benefit of Nelson Mandela saying, it's like, how about y'all not kill each other? It's like, I went through some serious shit and I'm here to say that's not the way.
Yeah.
But you need a stabilizing force like that, for instance. But I mean, I think that the unintended consequences one is huge. Like we had, I mentioned briefly to you, it's like, again, I work for online gaming for part of Activision, and there's a huge issue with and a case that came out in the States about equitable pay, discrimination, and all of that. And yet people in the community, like in the gaming community, is like, we should boycott Blizzard. And then you have, people that are staff that are directly affected by that saying, it's like, no, please. It's like, we need to stay employed and we're trying to make it better. Right. So sometimes those snap, like carte blanche actions, like there's unintended consequences people need to be mindful of.
Emotional response. Now, I don't know too much about it. I saw something about like the original like Gamergate with the women gamers and what was
the case?
Yeah.
It's I can't remember what the Department of Fair and Equitable Housing or Employment or something like that in California brought a case against Activision Blizzard, because they're Blizzard has space in California and Activision. How the company hangs together is really confusing. So we'll try to be brief
most
there.
Big companies.
Totally, it's like, well, we're incorporated in Delaware, but there's a stock ticker, and then there's these different companies. But anyway, so the main parts of it were unequal pay for same work. Issues with advancement and promotion, where you had people coming in with less experience getting promoted faster if they're men versus women, and like some absolutely harrowing stories of abuse and and people in positions of power being protected rather than dealt with.
Shocker, right?
Yeah.
That's in every single organization.
Yeah.
Like that's something I think in anything needs to stop. Like if you screwed up, you broke the policy, end of story, regardless of the level. But nepotism seems to be ingrained in human behavior.
Totally. And I mean, it's the any situation where somebody's financially incentivized, like, well, this person's a rock star. It's like, we don't want to, ruffle any feathers. And so it's like, we'll just make this be quiet and we'll move them to that studio over there. So there's a lot of, there's actually, there was a walkout. There's people that have a workers alliance. There's not a union because there's a specific separate, legal status and moves that have to be done there. But, so I think there's activity, and people are trying to actually put some energy behind, let's hold things accountable and say, can you at least please be, have some pay transparency, have some of these measures in place. But.
Yeah, because for me, it's like, depending on what you look at, any industry, it's like, for me, it's like, if you're being paid completely different for the same job, that's a problem.
Yeah.
But if there are other complicating facters, I'm like, you need to be honest about why there's like, a common one is not gaming. It's like, for that, it's men often do more dangerous job, which pay more. And it's like, with the pay disparity stuff, I always want to make sure, are they actually being paid differently, or is there some other manipulation of statistics going on here? You know?
Yeah, and I don't know where which stats they brought out. The examples that I recall, there was a specific case of, there was a worker that she was in one of the mocap studios and had worked her ass off over 10 years, was effectively running the place, and you had somebody that was brought in as as a superior, brand new into that role, and they were like, no, it's fine, you all will work together, yada yada. And then she ended up getting axed because there was duplication between their roles. It's like, you brought a new guy.
Yeah, it's never a good idea to do that, but people do that. That why would you someone who's doesn't know the ins and outs of the company have preference over it, unless they're like someone established who has shown that they know how to lead and develop. That's usually not a good, smart move.
And I mean, it's I think that there's gaming is unfortunately like it is one of if you go back to the example you gave of like the not like the reclusive nerd type thing. It's like that's kind of where the origins are, and then you had people that, at least from my perspective, I think you had the somewhat ostracized nerd for however long, and that's kind of what you grew out of. But now you get into a situation where you find something you're super passionate about, and you end up becoming the rock star. So there's all of like, you don't actually have necessarily that social transition is kind of messed up. So you had people come from that background and now have fame, fortune, whatever thrown at them. It's like there's a whole bunch of like abuse of power and such that comes into that situation.
They've made several several like TV shows based off of like a startup.
Startup culture is fucked up. Right? It's that just amplified and juiced with like a whole bunch more nerd culture.
Because it changed everything, because now tech, like startups, they could just be like a billionaire.
Oh, for sure.
In like 10 years instead of the entire lifetime to become a billionaire.
Yeah, or I mean, you have like some of the figures of this stuff. I mean, I feel I'm fairly well paid, but you have kids coming out of with comp sci degrees in Silicon Valley that off the bat your internship is $100K with housing and equity.
Yeah.
Like, it's staggering.
Like, well, then in San Francisco, because of Google, they basically blew out the housing market there.
Totally,
and just screwed everyone else. It's like, you guys are nuts.
You have literally like there was an example I saw of this, again, Twitter things and tech, but some folks asking, I think it actually ended up being in education. They were trying to say, it's like, if you are in graduate studies, like what are you actually making, and where do you actually get out of school? And it got out of context, and there's a dude that was like a senior security researcher at Netflix. He was like, my comp is like, $560K with this and that. And it's like,
for doing that. Like, because that's what it's like. Someone like me, for me to go out and get a job with $100K a year is unless I want to do sales, which I'm not doing. It's like, how do you get these jobs? In tech has just blown out like the pay scale compared to every other field that simply cannot.
It doesn't make sense. I mean, that's a thing for me in looking at like I help people play games, and I feel like I paid a shitload of money to do that. I mean, I enjoy my job. I'm good at my job. I mean, but there's different levels of societal contribution here. But at the same time, it's like when I started in 05, 06, I think my first job I made like $36,000 a year or something. And I know people hiring now that like out of school, the base level expectation for a starting job is like 60, 70, 80. Right? Like that's like fresh out of school and knowing sweet FA.
And then blow all their money on nonsense. And
Yeah,
I wish they taught financial literacy in schools. It would be very helpful.
Honestly, I am appreciative of starting with little and being forced to learn that discipline around it. So, between my wife and myself, it's like I was maybe making 36-40 and she was making say like 28-30 or something, and we're like, okay, we're gonna have a kid.
Which back in the day was
good money,
more acceptable. Now it's a bit of a stretch. You can do it.
But we squeezed to be able to like afford buying a place in like 07 when we got married, and then when it came to when we were gonna have kids, we're like, okay, we can make it work on my salary at that point for Shireen to stay home. And so you have to really squeeze and learn to be disciplined with that stuff.
Well, it's this way. We were in a 1-bedroom apartment now, which I'm totally cool with. But someone was like, if we're going to have kids, we need a bigger place.
Honestly, we do now, because we had a 2-bedroom place or 1-bedroom plus den. And the kids slept in the same room for ages. And we were like, well, at some point we need to be able to have more space, and so we moved out to our townhouse in Pitt Meadows. That's a 3-bedroom place. Whole bunch of times, the kids just want to sleep in each other's rooms. Anyway.
Well, they're conditioned for it now.
Well, but I think the thing is now it's a novelty, right? But the benefit is when they get in each other's face and it ain't working, we're like, go to your room.
Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens, because we're moving to a townhouse. We wanted a house with a yard because we can't stand dealing with other people at all. But the market right now is absolutely out of its mind. So unless I think to get a decent house in any place that isn't garbage, it's like 1.5 million plus in Metro Vancouver right now. So
even when we were looking, this was 18 or something, you could like, some 1960s, 70s house in Pitt Meadows would still be like 800-900K.
Yeah.
Now and our place was, I don't know, like 715 or something at that point for a townhouse. Now the duplexes in our place are just touching $1 million.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's wild.
Yeah, we figure if we get a townhouse now, by the time we sell, it'll be over $1 million because the new ones in the similar area are going for almost $1 million or slightly over. It's just for a townhouse, which is good news. Is I'll be able to have a garage gym finally.
There's a bunch of people on our complex that did that for sure. Yeah,
so I'm like, you can see here we just crammed it into a little room, and then it's not the most ideal situation. So it is what it is. So sort of going back like to Krav Maga, what has been your? I mean, obviously, I'm your only experience, but what has been the experience for you been like? Yeah,
I mean, I guess I don't have things to compare it to, so there's that aspect of it. But I think the thing that that I appreciate about like your approach and how you lead people through it, you don't just deal with it as like some fitness thing. There's one.
That's not Krav Maga when they do that.
Exactly.
It's just business bullshit.
But practicality, as well as like you have a decent structure around that, but you're also trying to like when I was going through UTKM now in terms of prepping for coming up to the belt test.
Still need to fix the glitch stuff though. Just
little bits at a time.
Swamped it with you know how it is. Anyways,
But the piece that I appreciate is the context behind things. Like you actually put effort into why are we doing X? Why are we doing Y? What's the feasibility of this from a physical perspective, but as well as contextual. Is like, why would you get up this way versus that? What's the surroundings around you? So that's fun, that I found to be like the something that I think is differentiating that people may, if they're just doing like rote technical concepts, you're not going to get.
Which hilariously, I was told early on, don't teach like that. That's bad. That's not Krav Maga.
Into the background for why?
The why and the how. It's because a lot of instructors are not capable of doing it in the Krav Maga world. They're not capable of the explaining because they weren't taught. They were just taught the techniques. And doing a podcast with, I just put it out today with Sarah Markovic in Australia, and the more I talk to people in the Krav Maga world, the more people who decide to leave the big organizations are choosing to teach like that. A more holistic,
going around the why,
the why and the how, and the holistic, more holistic approach to teaching Krav Maga. It's not as much as Krav Maga took out that sort of spiritual, cultural aspect out of it because they wanted to go practical first, which is an Israeli thing. We don't have time for that shit.
Right.
When you're running a civilian school, inevitably you kind of end up just circling back to that if you give a shit about your students.
Right.
Explaining stuff and developing it as you develop as an instructor. And I know a lot of people still don't like the way I teach. Well, I mean, it could be a me thing, but it's also a lot of people just don't want to hear talking. They just want to do. But it's self-defense, which implies so much more than just punching someone in the throat.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you have to be mindful of the what are the objectives that we're trying to accomplish. Like if you're dealing with like, wartime or lead up like roving thugs, then there's a level of pragmatism and effectiveness that you need to get to execution, but you also need to recognize that it's not always going to fly, but we're going for like 80% here, right? It's like get it done. Whereas we're not in that that type of time constraint to be able to train people up. So I think you can recognize that people are going to be you're working with individuals, not people that are necessarily going to be functioning as a unit. So there's that, and you have more time to be able to let them work out the background because there's not an imminent threat, that they're dealing with on the streets right now necessarily. Yeah,
and I don't know if I would have been so emphatic on the mental health aspect if I didn't grow up in somewhere like Vancouver. If I'd grown up in somewhere like Mexico City where it's like violent threats all the time compared to here, I'd focus more on that. But for a lot of people like the mental color code, their threat is anxiety and it's not real. And they perceive Vancouver to be this dangerous place. And it's like, no.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, but like you said, that's also dealing with the threats that are prevalent in your environment. So if the majority of the people who are going to be your students are going to be looking at that, possibly that anxiety or the mental health issue, then you need to also tailor what you're teaching self-defense as being towards that. They need to be able to identify and deal with those threats. So there's the self-awareness aspect is going to be of more service. Right?
Yeah, like I think if I lived somewhere where guns are more prevalent or gun violence is more prevalent, I'd be running gun seminars, live fire gun a lot more. But here, it's not really worth it at this point.
Right.
We used to do it a little bit, but it was just very difficult organizationally and getting the numbers and the people. It costs a lot of money to do that course. It's like for 4 to 6 hours, like a whole group is like $250, $300, and people don't want to pay. And it's because ammo is very expensive, right?
Yeah,
so there is that. But it is a changing. I don't think I would change my curriculum just because I moved. I would just add on or focus on stuff differently for the situational environments as needed. Because I think the fundamentals don't change regardless of where you are.
Right, but I mean, using like the weapons example or the the firearms example, it's like you have the luxury in the environment where we are now that you don't need to ramp that up as quickly necessarily. Yeah. So you can take the time to let's build fundamentals so that by the time we get to that, we're more established. Right? Yeah,
which I'm happy in this city allowed me to do that rather than focusing on other stuff.
Right.
I just hope they don't ban guns so that I can't do that here. There's an election coming up. Actually, when I post, there's an election still coming up.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
When I post this, I had to think about because I'm finally getting ahead of to get a whole bunch of podcasts recorded.
Yeah.
Because we're moving, and I'm like, shit, I don't have time now.
Yeah.
Like I made the commitment, I'm gonna do one a week, as much as I can, even if it's just me talking for whatever. And those ones I don't like to do as much because I'm lazy and they require research for me to actually pull stuff up and
as opposed to being able to
just free conversation. So I have a backlist, a whole bunch of people. Actually, I posted a video of, let's say, a certain prime minister getting booed and chased out of Surrey. I'll show it to you later.
I heard about that.
That did not go well for him. And this friend of mine from university was like, "Let's do a podcast." I was like, "Oh, I didn't know he had one." He's like, I'm thinking about starting one. And so I'm like, you come on mine, let's do it. And let's talk. We'll talk because we don't agree on how governments should operate and approach. So it's definitely not a martial arts one, but we're going to do that. But I was thinking, if it goes well, maybe I'll do another one with him where it's the opposite perspective thing.
Oh, yeah. Like point, counterpoint, kind of.
We'll see. We'll see. Because, COVID has got me doing one thing is I'm putting myself out there more consistently. I was being kind of lazy with the online stuff because Vancouver being small, my school is going to be small because Krav Maga is not a very popular martial art.
Right.
A lot of left-wing people are going to walk in, be polite, and walk out with half the shit I say, which is fine. Self-selecting means we have a more community environment, and we're not there. Have you been around when there's been students who clearly dislike what I'm saying, and they're trying not to? And I'm like, hey, I know you don't like what I'm saying, but what you were saying is factually incorrect. Here's why. And man, do they love that.
Well, I mean, it's like you and I don't always agree on everything either. But it's like I think that there's enough respect and being able to actually engage that as I said, I try to not just stick to one side of it.
I'm just aggressive about my stuff.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But I mean, it's part of your style, both your personality as well as that's your teaching style as well. There's pressure, there's distraction, there's all of those things, right? So.
Also, I'm nonstop. Just shut up, John. Let us punch each other. Yeah, well, it is what it is. The other thing that, because I don't know much about it, but it's interesting, is that the shirt you're wearing your charity? This
is somebody that we work with.
Okay.
They're not a sister organization, but they're folks that we work with a lot. This shirt is the Open Sanctuary Project. So we work with farm animal sanctuaries. My wife and myself, we started the charity early 2019, so we're going on about 2.5 years.
Great time to start a charity.
Yeah, it worked out. It was 2020 was we had 2019 to actually kind of get up and running.
Yeah.
And then 2020 we're like, well, okay, what do we do now? But we at least had some processes in place and all of that. But yeah, I mean, it came about my wife and I we're both vegan, have been for a long time.
That's the point of this discontent here, disagreement.
Yeah, for sure. We can get into that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so she was involved in some folks like in that community, and how it kind of came about is there was literally, I think it was like fall 2018 or something. She was in with a group of folks, and somebody was kind of frantically trying to do something, and she was like, "What's going on?"
Mm-hmm.
And it was literally like a large Berkshire pig. So you think like 500, 600, 700 pounds black pig. And I think this was like a fell off the back of a truck type situation, and then wasn't claimed by anybody. Trying to find her a home where she's going to go, and it was utter chaos. So my wife Serene is like, she's very much an organizer. She's like a process person when there's chaos.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Yeah. She'll work out systems and how to do things.
Yeah.
So she kind of helped wrangle that, because the challenge was like there are farm animal sanctuaries around BC, Alberta, wherever. But the folks that were trying to organize this, now you've got like 5, 6, 7 people that are just coming off, and everybody's phoning all the same people trying to see DF space, how we're going to get it organized. It's just the logistics are messed up. And then we had so Serene went through that, got it sorted. And then we had another situation over Christmas 2018, where there was a worker at a dairy that they had primarily jerseys, and jerseys are a bit of a smaller breed,
like a different type of pig.
Sorry, the cow.
Yeah, cow. Oh yeah, because you just say jersey, I'm like, I know it's something to do with animals.
Yeah. It's like your common dairy cows are jerseys and Holsteins. Holsteins are the white and black spotted, and then jerseys are the brown cows.
Oh yeah,
right?
it's what's that? Archer has a whole episode where one of the characters is like, "Holy crap, you were on a dairy farm? Me too. What kind of?"
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they have jerseys. They're smaller. So when in order to get milk, you have to get cow pregnant, have a baby, in order to produce milk.
Shocking how that works.
I know. People are like, I thought cows just make milk. I'm like, that's not. They're mammals. Figure it out.
Yeah.
But then the male cows obviously aren't helpful for milk. So if they're big enough, they're raised for veal. So they raise them like 6 months. If they're jerseys, they're generally too small. So they're literally waste product, right? So anyway, this particular this worker, he was like, if I can find homes for them, can I take them and get them to homes? So there was like 9 or 10 male Jersey calves. And so there was a whole community effort to try and figure this out. We ended up borrowing Serene's parents' minivan and driving over the Coke in a snowstorm on Boxing Day to get this calf to a sanctuary. And as we were doing this, we were like, this doesn't make any sense. So the charity was founded to say this whole like scramble chaos thing doesn't make sense. What we actually need is somebody that has truck trailer, has relationships with the sanctuary so they don't get flooded, and that the people that run those, because they're fucking busy as like that's what they're doing all day in and day out. They can't be trekking around the province to help facilitate and kind of be a middleman. So that's kind of what we started doing. Yeah.
So then the vegan thing, where does that come about?
Sure, yeah. So Serene and I come from kind of like different sides of it. I think it originally was I actually took some philosophy humanities in university, and my thing originally came from looking at like how our food systems work as a whole, like from a production standpoint, what we're doing in order to meet some of that food system demand is really fucked up from a financial and environmental
that point
standpoint.
I agree with 100%.
Totally, yeah. So I came originally from the environmental aspect, right? Serene was much more from like an emotional, reactive standpoint. So that's where we started. And my kind of thinking with it was like, I think that we need to shift things to a more balanced system as a whole and something that's lighter weight. And for myself, I can go along with like going farther to that side rather than, I think overall we need more balance, but I'm cool going kind of over to the edge to help shift the balance. So that was where it started, for myself. And I mean, as you progress along, I kind of shifted more into like a value theory kind of thing, because ultimately if you think of like how many animals I would consume or would be like killed for me to like survive on a regular diet for the duration of my life, that's a decent chunk. So that's a high count, and ultimately, since it's possible for me to survive and actually like I'm physically healthy and fine, to do that myself, The only benefit I'm actually getting out of like a more common diet would be a taste or preference thing. So if I put those side by side and you look at, you know, it's something on the order of I'd be like, you know, 10, 20 animals per year for the duration of my lifetime in order for me to have a preference. Like I can't justify that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where you know.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, some people can go vegan and do just fine. A lot cannot. I'm an example. If I don't have some sort of red meat, I think it's just genetics. Things go sideways real fast.
Yeah.
Right. So like I think what I just don't understand about that whole movement is like most people can agree that the factory farming is a problem and it's wasteful. But the manipulation of the data to like just say we need to get rid of the meat industry completely. It's like no, because people have shown private people have shown you can do sustainable farming in a very successful way that reduces the greenhouse print to like almost even a greenhouse sink. And
with like the grassland thing
where they rotate the cows and all that. And so like, does everyone need to eat as much meat as they do in America? Probably not. But the aspect of genetic variance that people just don't want to touch from a nutritional standpoint with a 30 million foot pole, because it always like, well, you're being racist. It's like, well, no, this is how genetic works. And like, for example,
you have different lactose intolerance between different people.
And for example, like if an Indian Hindu has been vegan for 10 generations, I'm gonna be like, yeah, they're probably fine on vegan. But I don't know, have they ever had a cat dog? But for me,
we call that the but bacon though defense.
Yeah, but bacon. Because like I know a lot of people who went vegan and possibly they just don't know what to do.
Oh, a lot of people
and they completely screw up and they just have to go off. But then, you know, there are people who they cannot eat plants because they have complete autoimmune issues. It seems like for a lot of people with autoimmune that going away from plants might actually be more beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, that aspect with like the personal fit type thing is not something that I'm super acquainted with because it hasn't been a factor for me,
for you, it just worked.
Yeah, so it's like it really comes down to like if you can handle the environmental aspect of it, like that, you know, addresses that part of it. But I'm still held out on like, since I can't justify it from like a standpoint of preference versus life, you know?
Yeah.
And that's since it's functional, and I actually think like personally for me, my health is better, and I have, you know, I ran my first half marathon, you know, a couple of years ago or whatnot. So I'm doing better, or I'm doing well. So I can't justify the cost.
Yeah. So like one thing that we do is we go hunting, right? And often in the vegan community, like, how dare you? And I'm like, you do understand it's probably more ethical if I shoot it and eat it than letting it die of pain because a mountain lion half tore its face off. Just from like from that sort of perspective, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, so you're totally fine with it getting tortured by a bear or a mountain lion,
I mean,
but me dropping it like that and they're dead.
Sure.
You know,
I mean, at that point, like, I think people talking about like an agency thing and what I'm putting into that situation. That's like a let nature run its course argument, I think.
Nature is not what people think.
I mean, nature's fucked up. Like, it's the, I don't know, it's like the nature is metal kind of thing where like,
it's a good Instagram account, that one.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Some messed up stuff.
So, I mean, there's the example that just popped to mind for me was like, and I've got like, again, some Buddhist background, right? There was somebody that, because Buddhism often has a vegetarian slant to it, but generally not in the lay population, right? More monastic, but there was a story now of it was like the village butcher that talked to the Buddha, and he's like, well, what am I going to do? It's like, I have to kill these animals because I'm supplying meat to the town. And because there the aspect was more about the notion of taking life and what the psychological impact is for yourself in taking life in order to do whatever you need to do. And the answer in that story was like, well, at least commit to, you know, only doing it between this hour, this time, and this time. So it's like a restricted part of your life. So there was a recognition of that pragmatic aspect of like, this is a functional thing in the situation in which you find yourself, that there's like whatever that benefit is. but trying to deal with the psychological aspect. So that's the thing for me. It's like if we were to you're not ascribing the same agency to a mountain lion as you do to yourself, right? So it's like they are, if they're an obligate carnivore, it's like that's their thing, and they don't have the same decision making as we do necessarily.
Just my argument's more about a pain thing.
Oh, sure.
More like if we're talking about pain and ethics of how to kill something, if you have to, it's like I'm pretty sure that deer is much happier getting shot than having its face torn off.
If you're talking about the perspective of deer, it's a different thing.
Yeah.
And I think the folks that are, if they're getting frustrated or upset, whatever, from that argument is because they're coming not straight from the deer's perspective. Is like, yes, but you're the one that's stepping in and taking the life. It's like your action to do that.
Yeah, so. Which if we get rid of unethical farming practices and factory farming, that I think, in my opinion, that argument has less merit. Like the whole, like, say, cow farming and methane gas. Well, it's a bit misrepresentative because one of the issues they have that problem is because you're feeding them corn and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And so when you start to break down, like, the why is this happening, then a lot of people have it's like that cognitive dissonance. It's like you realize what your claims aren't exactly
right.
true.
Yeah, and I think, like, I generally, regardless of which position you're coming from, and I don't even just mean on the vegan standpoint. It's like when you're discussing something with somebody, it's like I get frustrated when people overextend their position because it's like now you're going to a thing that you're actually opening yourself up to be knocked down a peg by something that wasn't necessary for you to extend into, and it's showing that you have a bias of you're trying to win the argument as opposed to actually finding truth, right? So yeah, But yeah, the thing on the farming aspect as well, it's like it's not, like you said, it's not just animal impact or whatever the horrors are of that. It's like how that industry functions from the weight on
corrupt.
Well, and the human, like, element of it is like honestly some of the psychological trauma from people working in these environments is just fucking horrendous, as well as with, like, migrant worker abuse, right? It's yeah, there are things that I cannot talk about.
You'll get too enraged. But, I think it's interesting, like, because from an ethical perspective, I made the decision to start hunting because I don't want to support those industries if I don't have to. Now, if we buy beef, we're luckily in Canada where you get grass-fed beef more often than not, and they're going to be better than a lot of places in the States. And then other people I'm not having meat. Right. And both groups of people are choosing an ethical decision based on we don't like the standard practices, and everyone's making a different way to go about that.
Right.
So it's just, I find it interesting, like how two different people will come to that complete different conclusions.
Yeah, and I mean, it also depends on what your motivation is, right? It's like generally, if people talk about a vegan vegetarian diet, it's like it's a question of whether you're doing it for environmental reasons, for health reasons, or for ethical reasons. Those are the primary drivers, right?
Yeah.
The ones that are the least sticky are health and environment.
Yeah.
The one that's the most sticky is when you get to some sort of, like, your ethical judgment on the situation of taking life for if you don't need to, and then we're talking about, again, that needs based where I'm fine personally, right? Because the diet thing that people, if you're simply doing is like, I'm going to be healthier, then it's just a diet, right? And people bounce diets like nobody's business.
Yeah.
If you're coming at from environmental aspect, people don't necessarily have the personal conviction, and they're, like you said, now are we talking about factory farming as opposed to other solutions, right? Whereas if people land on the something where they feel that there's an ethical weight to it, because of, as I said, like preference and luxury, taste versus life, then that's very difficult to weasel your way out of, right?
Yeah. Because for me, like a lot of people disagree that I think so. On one side, it's a sort of political spectrum is that people, like, say someone like Ben Shapiro, he's like ethics and morals are not relative, and I'm like, they are relative. Now, because people on the left will be like, it's relative, and then they'll take it as, I can do whatever I want. It's
right,
relative.
sure. Yeah.
So I think
the
one argument is that, hey, these are the ethics and morals that humans have picked that seem to work well, like thou shalt not kill, for example, or don't covet thy wife's, the 10 Commandments, essentially. If you actually follow them, those are pretty
They're sensible, and they're societal support, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, let's say in a parallel universe where it's a dark place where murder is completely ethically moral and it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I try to tell them in that universe that's what you're doing is unethical and moral, they'll be like, no, it's totally ethical and moral here.
Right.
And that concept of it is relative.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the Taliban taking over Afghanistan are now apparently saying we're banning music again because it's evil and we hope we don't have to coerce you. For them, that's ethical, and everyone else is looking. I am going to judge those assholes, but from their perspective, what they're doing is ethical, and it's like, what the hell? Like, this is craziness.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have like broad agreement. There are some things that are far enough apart in terms of the value we ascribe to them that we're like, okay, this we can make a judgment call on. But there are other, or a large portion of humanity can come to a roughly similar conclusion when you weigh two different things, right? So that's when I say, again, it's like, preference, pleasure, as opposed to life or suffering. It's like those are pretty easy to balance, right? But I think we have a very difficult time trying to envision something that is so flipped from a logical perspective of like, no murder is ethical.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we could envision a system where, somebody dying is to their benefit, and now we change the dynamics of the situation. But if we were straight like, no, causing suffering is morally positive. That's very difficult.
Is that like the
reason about
assisted suicide sort of thing, or?
Yeah, no, exactly. So, but I mean, you were talking about a parallel universe thing. So it's like if the laws of that parallel universe are such that somebody experiences euphoria, death, or that ultimately life is we deem that life is a horrendous bout of suffering, and so when you kill somebody, it's a benefit. I mean, I guess that comes into the assisted suicide question, right? So I think that now we can shift the calculus of it, as opposed to it's like, no, you're terminating somebody's life, you're depriving them of future happiness, you're depriving their family. It's like it's very difficult to flip the calculus to say that is morally positive for us. Right?
It reminds me, I was listening to Lex Friedman's one of my favorite podcasts right now, and he had an AI. He has many AI people on because he's an AI specialist. And they were discussing about the morals and ethics of AI and what's too far. And the guy, his argument, I forgot the guy's name, was something like, no, people shouldn't be scared of AI in themselves, because to an AI in itself, unless we program it into it, it doesn't care if it's on or off. It's just existing. But, and this somewhat made sense, if you program it into it the need or want or desire to self-replicate, now it has there's a self-preservation aspect. A self-preservation that it'll keep in to keep it self-producing. And this is where a lot of people get lost, is like, what do you mean it doesn't care if it's on or off? He's like, well, it doesn't need to, there's no need for it to preserve or not preserve itself for whatever reason. Right. Then the hypothetical is, let's say an AI in that sense is created, and then all of a sudden you create, I'm not a programmer, I don't know. I'm not in that field, but hypothetically, just by chance or code error, it teaches itself the value of self-preservation. And then what do you do? Right. Well, I mean, that's a not an obscure slip to fall into, because let's say you say the objective of this thing is to, I don't know, deal with environmental disasters or whatever it happens to be, right? So there can be a sense of how a lot of current neural nets function, or the notion of like machine learning, is that you give it an objective of some sort, and it is rewarded if it achieves or gets closer to that objective, right? So it tries a fuck ton of different possibilities of how to approach something, and then the iterations that get it closer to that goal are the things that are rewarded and are advanced into the next generation, right? It's literally a generational evolution. And that's how it then refines and does better, right? By total chance. So if you were to get to, well, we need to solve environmental disasters, and that is the objective. And then if there's a recognition like, well, if this system itself, or this instance of it, because we're not talking about something that's conscious necessarily, but this instance of this program or this AI disappears, then the likelihood of achieving that objective diminishes. Well, now it has a desire or a need
for self-preservation in order to achieve the objective, right? So that's kind of where, like, if people were to, just from a pop culture perspective, get to the Skynet aspect, you know, if Skynet, in order to make the world a better place, you know, if Skynet has to exist and humans are the ones fucking it up, well, then humans have to be eliminated, right? That's kind of the pop culture way.
My theory, hypothesis, whatever, is that if it is able to evolve fast enough, there may be a window where it has that attitude, but I think that attitude is very human, because if morals are relative and what's evil is relative to that, I mean, for our human perspective, we can say, hey, that person is evil because they don't care about other people, etc. But then AI evolving quick enough may simply come to the conclusion this is a natural part of the universal process, I'm going to leave it alone. Sure. Right.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I mean, and there's a notion of the system as a whole as opposed to individual instances, right? Let's say you've got like physical manifestations. You have, you know, call it a robot, or call it a machine, or whatever, right? The individual existence may not give a fuck if it exists or not. However, it can strive for the preservation of the system, for the system, you know, however many copies, replicas there are of it to succeed. So there can be like a social benefit, like, I don't want to say communistic, but like in terms of it needs the whole to survive, but there's no care for the individual, right?
Well, that's why I don't like big government, because from the human experience perspective, that's what ends up happening. Sure. Regardless of political ideology.
If the system has a need for self-preservation.
Yeah, the system becomes too big, and then you're just doing things to keep the system going, because we need our budget the next, and it's the same, like, to me, this is so obvious that you need that balance of you can't have it too big, or you can't, it cannot be about the systems and, you know, one of the things I find problematic about Silicon Valley and programmers, and perhaps it's because it attracts a lot of autistic people, that when you start to look at everything as numbers, it's easy to make decisions that screw everyone over, because you've dehumanized like that aspect. And that's why I think a lot of business decisions that are too focused on the numbers, whether it be just because I want the money financially, or whatever, will have a lesser net positive overall than if you realize you have employees that need to be happy and productive and all that sort of stuff.
I mean, it becomes a very like strict utilitarian type thing, right? It's like, and I think there's two aspects in play there, right? The one is, like you said, the dehumanization and strictly like the financial calculus part, and the other is like there can be a notion of hubris that comes into play there. It's like, we're super skilled, we solved all these problems, so now we can apply things into a different area, right? And sometimes that's fine, but sometimes it's really fucked up. You know, so the example, like Musk is the example of those things where he's like, there's multiple industries that he's successfully disrupted. But that's
hold my beer.
yeah, totally, right. But then there's other examples of startups from like the young Harvard Business School type graduates that are in that same mindset of we're going to be able to disrupt, and it was like how vaccine distribution works, or how like test distribution works, like massive fucking boondoggles, because they have zero experience in terms of how to actually execute on these things. So it's that hubris can sometimes be a downfall as well.
Yeah, an idea in itself doesn't mean anything. It's how you execute it, and then, well, to me, like, because I don't want to get too political with you, but the certain ideologies right now have these ideas which like hypothetically are a good idea because what we want to achieve is morally good. Right. But you can see in real time they're failed ideas. But the damage is done.
I had there was a notion I came to at some point where, I mean, it to a degree it gets into sometimes the like end justifies the means thinking getting in the way. Yeah. And sometimes there's if you come to there are times when anger at a situation is warranted, right? At what the current, if there's, whether that's, social justice, people being oppressed, whatever the situation is, where you're like, there's a righteous anger vibe that goes through, and that may be accurate. The trouble becomes that when you get wrapped up in that, it can be it is very difficult in righteous anger to nail the whole package. You can either be, sometimes you can lean towards the anger side without it's easy to lose perspective. So I think when people start getting into that cycle of like, no, we're doing this for the moral benefit, and we're right in this, it can be, you can start to excuse things that we would normally not do outside of that. So, and I think that it's very easy to keep going down that path of convincing yourself, but we're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, but are they? Like, that's one thing that bothers me, politically or otherwise. It's like, hey, if you have a strong moral stance, you need to apply it across the board equally,
right.
including on your side.
Right. Yeah.
And people just, one side right now, and I find it drives me nuts. We're like, oh, but 50 years ago, this group did that. It's like, no, I'm talking about right now. One side is doing just as bad, or if not worse, things morally than the other side that they're accusing of. Right. And it's like, I just caught you. Yeah. Like, no, it's fine.
Yeah, it's like, because.
But no, what you're doing is the same as or worse as what you're accusing that person.
Right. And that can get waved behind as like, I think that I think you're correct in that in progressivism it's easier to slip into that.
Oh, you picked up on what group I was talking about.
It was very subtle. It was hard. I'm a very good reader. I think it's easier to slip into that because it can often be driven closer to a notion of like, but we have a more expansive or inclusive notion of how we want to lift people up. But that it can be
education.
Easier
That's what you do.
Yeah, it can be easier to forgive and to point out where it's like, yes, but you're doing bad things to accomplish bad ends. We're doing slightly bad things, but that's the moral justification challenge, right?
I mean, for me, the solution is it's first of all not indoctrinating people with ideas that have not been proven good or bad, but educating everyone, giving everyone the opportunity to learn to the same level. Now, I think one of the issues in, say, the American system regarding education, which is a complete failure at this point, I think. Well, so let's say you're not the smartest person in Canada. It's irrelevant of what background you come. We have like learning assistants just to help them get the support they need. And the really smart kids can then go to they can test for like IB programs here. But in the U.S., like the public school system doesn't seem to really have the support.
And there's a very large disparity about what's available depending on where you are.
Yeah, based on the taxpayer thing. And instead of making it easier for everyone to get the general access to what they each need, they basically make the whole system shittier. Because it's harder to uplift than just to shit the system and bring it all down.
I mean, that's for me is the challenge with if you provide people with information on things that don't actually have a strong, say, scientific backing, or there's not strong reasoning behind it, right? Because in the notion of providing access to all information, it's like, well, if we were to say it's like we're going to teach like heliocentrism because and we're going to put it on equal footing with I can't remember because heliocentrism is closer to correct, but anyway, if we're gonna well, because the sun isn't the center of the universe either.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, okay.
But like if we're gonna still continue advocating that the Earth is the center of the planet, we're gonna put that on equal footing as a valid theory. It's like, well, we got a problem, right? If people don't have the means to be able to discriminate and to distinguish between those things, you're going to have an issue, right?
But didn't you know the Earth is flat?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't understand that one, but okay.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I think that people like I get a kick out of like pushing the limits or something. But anyway, it's so the challenge with where people are coming from, I think. With trying to say no, but you shouldn't teach X, is because there's a fear that people are not properly equipped to be able to make that discrimination.
What do you mean by that?
Let's say you have if we were to get to, since we were talking about the U.S., if we were to say that intelligent design should be put on equal footing with evolution and those sorts of discussions, it's like, if we can present information, that's fine, but we need to be able to provide enough information about this is what the current state of the art or the top of our understanding is. We can teach historical context to something. So we can teach that evolution of that we consider the Earth was the center of the universe, and then we're like, oh no, we've now determined that it's closer, that we're revolving around the sun, et cetera, et cetera. But I think where people start to get concerned is where things are presented with needing to have an equal defense. And if people that you're teaching this to, if they're like younger kids, they don't yet have the distinguishing tools to be able to see, well, this one is actually bullshit because of X, Y, Z. The information here is better. So, but as soon as you start tilting information, tilting towards, well, this is the correct one, where do we make those distinctions, right? Yeah. So, but if you take that too far, you can say, when you extend that into notions of like social theory or ideology or those types of aspects, which is the one that you're presenting? If we're just saying these are equally valid, but where are there things where we are actually weighing? It's like, well, there's an advantage to this versus that.
Yeah, the religion one is interesting because I went through the process of like full on atheist, like grew up Jewish, not religious family, but atheist, and then now I'm more agnostic. But the sort of the science people will be like, how can you? I can believe this, and then and they'll say, look at all the atrocities of the church. No, there are. Sure. You can't to pretend there isn't is insane. Yeah. But then I can then turn around and be like, but you're now idealizing and religiousizing either science and or politics,
right? Yeah,
and I can point out that you guys are doing the exact same thing because the root thing is that some humans are dickheads,
right? It's any system is open to abuse, right?
Yeah,
it's a question of how we exploit it.
Now, as far as the religious aspect, I despite people's claims this year, I do like science and support it very much, but I don't believe in rash decision making just because of a new piece of information, because it's very disastrous. Yeah. If you have no longitudinal studies for something, I have that as a serious problem. Right. For something fairly recent. But the best argument I heard for religion, let's take aside the corruption and the bad behavior in certain organizations, as to why it might be necessary for humans at this point. It's actually Ben Shapiro. He kind of changed my mind on that, is that it's a check for the bad behavior, in that if you believe in something outside yourself that's beyond yourself, you will then, regardless of how you justify it, act slightly better in theory. Sure.
That's kind of like a notion of both a societal glue thing as well as like general moral compass and all of those. It's like and don't get me wrong. It's like I'm not trying to shit on religion. And it's like if you want to call me anything, you could call me Buddhist, right? So the thing that I find really interesting is that you generally find where, at least in my experience, or I've generally found, where you find disagreement between different religious groups is generally more on the laity, right? When you start to get to
like the literalism of how to do it,
when you get more like even past the clergy, because there's like institutionalization there, but when you get to like the mystics of any tradition, they actually have more in common with each other than the people in their own religion.
The fundamental principles of most religions are fairly similar.
So there's
don't be a dickhead, be respectful within reason.
Well, and things start like the literalism starts to drop away. There's more of a convergence on the things we can't actually put properly into words, where the rituals, the stories, all of those things are intended as like an experiential guide towards something, towards an experience. But if you start to take, if you were to take the things I was describing of like what drew me to Buddhism, is like there's a notion of pragmatism, there's a notion of hammering through it yourself, there's a notion of recognizing that like when you have a tanka, like the big like the paintings on the wall of these different deities, it's recognizing that as a means to describe an aspect of your own mind, right? As opposed to, and it's putting it out there as something that you can hang on to a degree or be a pointer. But when you start to say, it's like, I am supplicating this external being in order to make my life better, it's like that's where things start to be problematic. And then you get into like mutual exclusivism between different religions and shit kind of goes sideways.
Yeah, because it's like, Judaism in its fundamentals is like the 10 Commandments, essentially. And then you got the different ways to interpret it, and it's like, some of these guys have like gone totally off the deep end. Now I remember I was distracted. I'm so tired today. The reason why the why is so important to me in Krav Maga or in general is because if you forget the why, you end up doing things for no reason. So
100%.
Religion is the good example.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you forget why a ritual was there in the first place, you don't know whether to ask, do we need this still or do we not?
Yeah.
And, have you heard of the stoned ape theory?
Yes. Yeah.
To do with psychedelics and mushrooms, and it's a interesting thing about Christianity that there's a lot of speculation now that the church kind of damped down was that the psychedelics were a huge part of Christianity, which is one of the reasons why it took off.
Paul's stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. Which my understanding is it was actually him who really spread the religion, not actually Jesus of Nazareth. But I'm not a religious scholar. But to me, with the religious stuff, the turkey example. Were you in class when I gave the turkey example?
I don't think so.
Yeah. So I forgot. I heard it on some podcast because the wife is cooking a turkey and she's cutting off the end of the turkey before she puts it in the oven. The husband is like, you always do that, and it dries out the turkey. Like, you shouldn't be doing that. It makes no sense. Why do you do that? Says, and this was someone's actual story. Oh, my mother always did it like that. I thought that's the way you're supposed to do it.
Right.
And so they asked the mother's like, I don't know. Well, the grandma did it like that. Or grandma, why did you do it? What was the answer? Do you know? And
great grandma did it. Yeah, my mom did it before me. Oh,
there was a reason.
The bucket was too short.
The oven, that a very small oven, turkeys never fit in, so she'd cut it in for a practical sense. So it means the daughter of the grandmother didn't need to do that because she didn't understand the why.
The why,
and nobody explained the why.
Right.
As to why I need to do this. And so with cultural practices or traditions or whatever, the why you do that is really important because every generation you need to ask, do I still need to do this? Or is this just silliness? Yeah. And that's where people in religion, for example, or because culturally acceptable practices get stuck because they're like, I'm comfortable doing this. I'm used to doing the automatic lights. And then it's all of a sudden got really intimate here. And then people don't understand. So like when I'm talking about the why, it's important for a legal defense in modern society. Right. But also like defense, don't just do it because I told you to do it. Because then you don't understand what you're doing.
Well, and I mean, there's practical applications too. It's like it is impossible to teach every single permutation of a situation, right? So there's that. But yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the thing for me when we come to like you said, if there's a ceremony or a ritual or something behind how we do it. I'm like, even if you were to take the example of the turkey, it's like, well, it's kind of a ritual. It's like you go through the steps, right? Yeah.
But it makes it dry, the turkey. Yeah, totally. So it's silly.
In the Buddhist analogy for that is they talk about baking bread, and the reason being it's like that the Dharma, which is like the teachings, that's the recipe, right? But you've got to bake the bread. So you're baking bread each time, and everybody's gonna have a different result. You need to actually taste it and whether the bread comes out properly. But you need not just cut off the tail of the turkey in that example. So because then you can actually explore about does the bread taste like shit or not?
Yeah. Then me and my wife have this discussion about like what's the evolution. Like let's say fundamentally it is just a 1-0 equation. Is there an end, like a legitimate end goal, and the universe is like, I don't know, there's a million ways to get to that end goal. You all figure it out based on your environment, or is it simply just a response, yes/no response to what's going on for the best possible means of survival of the genes?
Right.
It's like, for example, The Expanse. Have you seen The Expanse?
I've not.
Oh man, she's so good. I still think Battlestar Galactica was much more existential, but in The Expanse they find this like molecule, this little molecule, and then it starts to infect things and develop, and it's evolving. But it's some sort of advanced, forgotten technology that has an end goal of evolving to gather resources to build a portal. Okay. And that's all it was for.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So it's doing all this stuff, and it seems like it's a super hyper intelligence thing, but it's actually all it's doing is trying to achieve its goal, which is build a portal. Right. And it literally starts as a little crazy advanced molecule that they find, and they're like, how do we weaponize it? How do we do all that? Like that's the first season or second season or something. And then they start, exploring it. I forgot what season they're on now, but that is like that specific thing actually had an evolutionary angle. So for something like for us,
because it was designed.
It was designed. Like, is is it just is everyone simply just responding to a yes, no, and we're finding the best solution, or is there an end goal? Because that's why, like, for me, it's so important not to have centralized power, because then you're assuming, let's say we don't know what the end goal is, and you centralize the power and we're like, this is the way to do it, and you completely screw up. And then let's say there is a God, he's like, idiots, you're not going to get to the end goal. Or
you're going to take another few millennia.
Yeah, or is it simply you need the variations for the best possible chance of continuous survival for the genes, which actually don't really care up how they end up.
Right.
In which case, there is no right answer.
Yeah, and I mean the place where I find myself is that, and I guess this is part of my own journey, coming from, again, like a Christian background, which definitely has like specific goals, as opposed to something that's more Buddhist, because there's like I don't currently find that I'm at a place where the finding like an origin story, for instance, and whether there's an explicit end goal is knowable to me. However, there are things that I can discover about myself, about how I behave, how I interact with the world, where I can be a benefit to others that I can practice towards. So that's something that I think is a worthwhile goal, regardless of the other things. It's like I try to be somewhat pragmatic with that. I'm like, where if there's I can't remember what the guy's name was, but there's a notion of like the bullshit asymmetry principle, right? It's much easier to simply posit something than it is to actually disprove it. It takes an order of magnitude more effort to properly understand something than just put it forward. So when it comes to things that I'm looking at, I want to put in the effort to understand this or pursue this or whatnot. I need to have a reasonable expectation that I'm going to be able to do that properly. And then I can cool, now I can investigate this. Like whether or not we're placed here by ancient aliens, I'm not going to be able to determine.
Be cool though.
I'm sure, yeah, but it doesn't make a big difference to my day-to-day life. So the return on investment for me trying to explore things and discover them to the point where I would have a reasonable amount of confidence to have to make a judgment call on that is going to be a huge, but not going to really serve me much anyway. So that's kind of how I try and discern what I'm going to look at.
Which is interesting. Like, I'm naturally like, if you leave me, I'm a thinker, and I'm like, I like the ideas, and I don't necessarily like the doing. I'm like at the beginning of the process, like, hey, why don't you go do that theory? Like, you go figure it out. I'll think about it. And it's, let's say someone else is like, but that's not practical use of your brain power. I'm like, well, why not? Like, I want to think about what could be, what is, what's a better idea, what.
For sure.
I think you need the thinkers and then the doers, because for like a lot of aspects of science, for say, is completely irrelevant to the average person for the day to day. Right. Though the results of it, they don't realize they're relying on heavily.
And I think like absolutely you need, there's I try to, like I said, I would describe I have kind of, I should do this, or and then I should study, and then I should have a night where I can Netflix and chill or whatever. But I really enjoy just reading like fiction, reading novels, or reading classics, or whatever it happens to be. There's not necessarily some specific end goal or benefit that I get out of that, but there's discovery and there's enjoyment, and my mind starts to work in different ways. So while I may not there's not a specific utility in me reading like Machiavelli's Prince. I mean, I could say if I'm trying to get into business or whatever, I could go for that. I don't necessarily have to agree with it, but it's helpful for me to go and understand and explore that. And my brain starts to work maybe a bit of a different way and understand some other situations.
Yeah. Well, it's like perspective and creativity and imagination. Like, so this idea, well, you should know better. It's like, okay, but not necessarily, because people may be lacking information, their brain doesn't process, they don't come to the same conclusions. Right. You really need to actually just point people in the right direction sometimes, because it's like everyone has probably had that moment like, oh shit, I literally did not think of that.
Right.
Like, it's so obvious, but I didn't think of that. And all you needed, like, so a lot of people reject fiction because they're like, it's not practical, but it's like actually a lot. Like, for example, so many scientists watch Star Trek and were like, I want to make that happen.
Oh, sure.
And it drove them
the inspiration
through, I want to make, and some things are complete spectacular failure, like Transporter. I don't think we're getting anytime soon.
Yeah, we've transported small things.
Wow. Until we know what consciousness actually is.
Yeah.
I think that we're a little ways away from transporting a living object.
Yeah.
But or like Holy Grail, the medical tricorder. But other things that they were speculating in, then people have made become reality.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, so there's that inspirational aspect, and but I mean, even I think other parts of fiction, like reading novels and reading stories. Like I like I said, I did some philosophy and humanities, and we did a chunk of like Greek classics, and so there's reading Medea and reading, some of the Homeric hymns and whatever. It's like there's stories there of human experience and something that you may not have personally experienced yourself, but that you can then start to envision what the dynamics are between those people. So there's even that, like the whole, sorry for a cliche term, but the human condition aspect of like what does it mean when we place ourselves in those situations? There's churning, and there's like it feeds to kind of the basis of what's available for you to call upon when you're facing a given situation. So I think there's benefit there, but I mean even besides that, there was somebody that what was it? They were an artist, so they did like web comics and whatnot, and they were saying that people were giving them shit for like, you always start this stuff but you never finish it, right? I was like, yes, but they found for themselves all these little side projects that they do. It's like they're drawing, they're expressing their creativity, they're finding out what works, what doesn't, they're advancing how they draw and their skill set and their art. So it's like, while there wasn't an end product to like 80 or 90% of the things that they started, there was still benefit that they derived out of that, right? They still tried things, failed, figured out what worked, what doesn't, had practice in their art, all of that. So.
Yeah, learn the failures. Like if you look at like angel investors, they'll invest in 10 companies knowing 9 of them are going to fail, and that same principle applies to learning development and keep going, and you'll figure it out eventually whether it's the right answer for someone else. Maybe not. It's the right answer for you or that at that time.
Right. I mean, and there's the thing that I don't know how this is going to pan out, but there's folks that are discussing. I think Simon Sinek and others had done a bit of a similar thing of like how we relate to failure and how it's become much more challenging or much more risky to fail in like the current internet age. There's so much pressure to simply there's so much competition in order to actually be able to make a living and get out and differentiate yourself, because the pool is so wide. Yeah,
I mean, it's relative though, because for me, like self-defense, failure is death. And right. For most of human life, that's what failure meant. You die.
Yes. and a yes, but there, of like, but we fuck up in training, right? But we have to, because you have to go through the experience of what doesn't work in order to practice your body. So I think that's what those folks were trying to point out, and I'm kind of looking at that for my kids of like, I didn't have that same degree of all of my fuck ups and missteps being permanently recorded, right?
Oh, I see what you mean. Now I get what you mean.
Yeah, it's that aspect of like
you can't sweep it under the rug anymore.
Yeah, no tolerance of failure and missteps. So and as you said, is like that failure is critical for us to be able to actually learn and advance and grow.
Yeah.
So
like I just briefly, I don't know what the thing whatever about Jocko podcast, and you just started talking about like you all shit on war, but you know how much positive stuff has come out of war because of the need to quickly come up with a solution, or you will die. You know what I mean?
I see. Yeah.
It's like the need for solutions and iterations and being okay with that. But in when you're cornered and that failure is death, you figure out a solution real fast, and we've become so uncomfortable with it, possibly for the reason everything is recorded now, and there's zero forgiveness in like cancel. Like people are lunatics about what's acceptable to go after someone and what's not.
Right.
We'll ignore like Anthony Cumio's decision, all that bullshit in New York. We're not gonna anymore because it's convenient for me or my group of people. But dude, you screwed up, right? And you just say you screwed up, and like nope, because that would be weak. But it's like,
well, it's what? when you get I mean, a zero tolerance thing is exceptionally challenging. There was
zeroism. I despise zeroism as a general rule. It just is not how things work.
Yeah, there's no room again that blanks out any room for growth, right?
Yeah.
There was an example of that where I think this played out decently. Ultimately, there was I can't remember the guy's name, but he was he's in game development as well, and he's now at I think it was at EA. And there was stuff that was dug up of, you know, years and years and years ago, like blogs that he had put out where he was just a misogynistic fuck. Like it was pretty fucking brutal and super racist. But it was like the internet edgelord type bullshit, right? And so that got brought to light, and he was canned from Riot because people were calling for his head. But there was actually a huge amount of people that ended up stepping forward. Is like, actually, since then, like, he was a kid, he was stupid. He's actually come forth and apologized, and he's actually now been at the forefront at a whole bunch of work advancing support for women in games and for like doing that type of advocacy. So he was actually like for a whole chunk of time he was targeted by Gamergate because they didn't like that he was actually supporting women in games. So there's shit dug up about him in order to shit can him. So anyway, I think that's the challenge when people make some of those snap judgments.
But you did this 20 years ago. You're canned. It's like, are you kidding me?
So in this case, like, he was canned, and that's BS. But there's a whole bunch of people in the industry that were like, actually, y'all don't know the full story, and kind of brought that forward. So he's got support from that. Right?
Yeah, that's the thing is that the pressure and the malice and the hate and all that, people don't want to accept the growth. But if someone is like screwed up and down the road they're not better, then it's like, okay, now we can talk about that. But now it's just like, nope. I think that's one of the reasons, like, to politicians, one of the problems is we don't want to hear from our politicians that they screwed up, because then we won't vote for them. But the reality is, it's like, what did you do and why did you screw up? If it was like, hey, I made that decision, it was a complete misunderstanding, now I know, it's one thing. Now if they're just saying it, then forget you. But it's us, the public's fault this keeps happening, because they know it's political suicide to be honest about it, and it's safer and better for your political career just not to acknowledge it, right? Especially like the whole cancel culture thing, that just like, it's to the point where it's lunatic, like it's just nonsensical at a certain point.
I think that like the difficulty is those, you know, like the Twitter environment doesn't lend itself to like detail, right? Whereas like for me personally, like, what has actually served me the best in my career, like work-wise, professionally, I mean personally as well, has been integrity. When you fuck up, say so, and then actually go from there
and figure it out.
Because the thing is, and especially like if you do that with the big things, then people know that even on the small stuff that they can actually give you that grace, because they recognize that if it was actually your fault, if it was your mistake, you will own up to it and you advance. And having that confidence from people is priceless. So the challenge is that in order to be able to do that, you need an environment where people are going to give you the grace to say, it's like, we expect that people make mistakes. That is fine. But it's how you recover from that. You know, it's why do we fall, Master Wayne? Like that thing. That's right.
Yeah, that's why I get so annoyed when I see people intentionally screwing around with stuff. And it's like, you know, just be honest about it. Well, if I'm honest about it, you won't do what I want you to. That's where I have the problem.
If I figure out you're manipulating me, I have zero fucking
Which, as
trust.
we talked before this podcast, I'm highly speculative that's what's going on in certain situations. And I'm not. That's what I'm really angry about. Because if you want, like, my biggest fear about, let's say, a whole situation going on, and I'm not the only one who's expressed this, that if you keep up with this attitude of manipulating and not admitting stuff, you will get people to reject science, or reject truth, or reject the correct process, because you're like, well, and this is gamers, programmers, intellectuals do this, is, well, you're too stupid to understand, so I'm not going to try it. And it's like, well, the actual attitude of doing that, certain people that I was talking about earlier have basically said that publicly. Right. You don't understand it anyway. Right. And then one of the examples was, you're not a doctor. You don't know how to read a scientific literature paper. I'm like, what the fuck do those two things have to do with each other? And that's sort of attitude that, well, I'm going to manipulate and control things because I won't get the result out of you. Right. And then you're like, you lied about it. And they're like, oh, it was for the greater good. It's
right. If you, exactly. So that's the challenge with like the end justifies the means thing, right? It's like, I know best, and it is, you know, I even I think in like our own personal or professional environments, like I struggle with that of like, when I need to get, I know what, because this is my area of expertise. So like, I need to do a network design, I need to get a certain result, whatever. are there times where I need to like guide things toward what the correct situation is, so that people don't get stuck on like details that are actually just going to distract and be bullshit and not actually help us get there. So I think that takes a lot of discipline and practice for how to say, this is the full range of things that we could possibly do, but really this is where we need to go because of X, Y, and Z. And like, this is a bad idea for this reason. But you need to be able to communicate to who your audience is. Like, that is a lot easier to do in small groups.
Yes,
where
that is true.
know who, like, who has what level of competence in which area. It is really, like, I don't envy people trying to deal with moving a giant group of people in a given direction, or like it's a nightmare.
Well, Jeff, here's the issue. Here's where it gets screwed up. Jeff Bezos basically says this about decision making. 70%, good enough.
Right.
Otherwise, you're gonna either the amount of energy and time and resources you're gonna spend to get that remaining amount.
Oh, you mean for certainty?
Just for moving forward towards any goal.
Right.
So if I have to make it, it's like, do I have 70% of the information, or do I have 70% of what I need? We need to go forward, because if you want to spend on any decision, and maybe that's why the number was set at 70% for that other thing that they're blatantly ignoring now, which is this is where I'm annoyed.
Yeah.
Because either you gotta let it go and accept that 30%, or you go full dictatorship control psychopath, and you just destroyed a whole bunch of stuff. Resources have been wasted for the energy, like the point of diminishing returns for input output. That's why I don't like zeroism, because let's say you need X amount of energy for anything to get to 90%, but in order to get that 100%, I need to quadruple my energy output. It's like, are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
And you can, I think it's a universal thing.
Right.
You can take that and apply it
Oh,
to
for sure.
anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the 80-20 or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, because I mean the what was I going to say? The 70%. No, I totally
output efficiency, decision making, like trying to force that last percentage to get where you're going. Like perfectionists often are very not productive.
Right, because they stall out. Yeah. Oh, sorry, that was it. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. For in order to, it is much simpler to be able to do that thing where you can take a few shots at it, or where you don't. Where like if we make a decision to go, right? If we can iterate on it and we can recover and then keep going forward, then, and that lends itself to the thing we were talking about with failure, right? If we can make smallish bets and then kind of step forward, and we leave our options open, and we commit that we can backtrack if we have to, cool. The difficulty becomes like, it is a lot harder to make that call if you're betting the entire company, right? So if there's like that much of a, like, how much certainty is enough to make that that big of a bet, right? Yeah. So, and I think like in tech, there's more opportunity for that, especially with somebody the scale of AWS is like, well, let's throw the service out there, see if it works, and then if it doesn't,
half
we'll
of Google's products.
Seriously. Yeah. Then that's fine, because we can like, if we have reasonable confidence that there's a market for this and that's going to help things. Throw $5 million at it, see if it works, and if it doesn't, we'll move on.
And that's how smart companies operate. And like the comparison, like a lot of people say, you can't compare a government to a company. It's like, if a company goes 100% in on something, an idea, a theory, and it fails, it's done. If a government does that, they just take more money from you. And this is where, like, that's why I don't like it. No matter what the reason, ends justify the means. Yeah. You stop putting all your eggs in your stupid little basket that may end up destroying a lot more than you think if you go 100%.
Right, yeah.
For a variety of reasons, right? You need a control group. You need all sorts of... You could apply this to anything. Yeah. Like, so for example, it's controversial, but less controversial is universal basic income.
Right, yeah.
And they've tried it in tons of places. Now, in hypothesis, it seems like a good idea, right, but it keeps hitting sticking points where it just doesn't. Canada tried it in a few places before. Now, perhaps because people aren't ready for it yet. Like, I'm on the fence both ways. I see both sides of the argument for universal basic income. I think my conclusion is you just have to accept 20% of people are useless, and 20% of people are going to accept.
You're not going to fix the whole thing.
You can't. You just can't.
Yeah.
Right. So on one side, like a conservative perspective would be, well, everyone's got to work. I don't want to give them something for nothing. I was like, are you going to prepare to kill these people? Because we've decided that's not ethical. So what are you going to do with them? Maybe they need the money.
Right.
But on the other side of the spectrum is the creatives. You take a stress factor away from them, and they become more productive.
Totally. Well, and there's a pragmatism thing. I mean, we see the same principle, I think, play out with like safe injection sites or whatever, right? And I think there's similar things when it comes to UBI. It's like, if we do this, what are the other parts that we spend money on for like infrastructure and government programs and social supports that would lessen, right? Yeah. So if you have, for the safe injection site thing, it's like if we fund this to this degree, can we actually do we have fewer issues with some policing? Do we have fewer, medical expenses, whatever, because we're doing it in a controlled environment? So I think that's perhaps some of the same logic that has to be applied to UBI, and whether you can actually net those gains successfully. And then write off as like, listen, there's going to be people. There's always people that abuse the system, so it'll be a thing.
Yeah.
And you just call that cost of doing business kind of.
Well, that's the thing is people want either 0 or they want 100.
Right.
They want one side or the other, and we need to stop doing that because it's counterproductive in the end.
Yeah.
You see what Jeff Bezos did with that attitude, like. Regardless of his moral of how he runs his company, just that approach that you end up wasting so much time and energy on just this extra,
right? And
we need to get forward. So you have to decide what your acceptable level is, 60% through to 80%, somewhere in between, depending on the topic, in order to move forward. And people just get stuck on those, like.
Well, and I think that's maybe the same idea with UBI, right? Is like people have, I think we use that as an example, but whatever. Is that. If you want to be able to call that last 20%, it's like usually the distinction is going to be in how much time and effort and what's the process that we're going to push people through in order to qualify them or require them to go through these steps. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm kind of contrasting it with like a social welfare versus UBI type thing, right? It's like, well, how much money do you spend on that versus just saying fuck it, just give them money. And I think there's a similar principle with say like some countries that have for their taxation systems. They're like, we know how much you make. You gave us that thing. It's like, here's your filled out. Just give us this money. And if you want to go spend money on doing more because you have weird investments, sure, that's fine. But as opposed to how much money do we spend on auditing and our tax authorities.
So obnoxious. The IRS is brutal. CRA is not as bad, but they're still like...
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, how much money are we investing in order to run the infrastructure in order to get that level of certainty, right? That's the...
Yeah. And it's... Actually, you're at the whole learn to code thing, which got bastardized heavily by politicians.
Oh, like the boot camps? Or?
No. Just the attitude of... So as we phase out blue-collar work, that's where the Andrew Yang's thing about UBI sort of came in, which was...
just teach them to code?
Just teach them to code, which I'm like... first of all, what I forgot the person who originally said it, but their intention, I understand, was you need to understand the basic principles of a system in order to be... And that's what they really meant by learn to code. Yeah. And then it got...
Don't make them professional software developers.
Don't make them, and it's like, it's why I teach the why. It's so important. It's a more basic principle, but like, so that whole thing about humanity and the human condition is you're actively, these places are trying to phase out the low level workers. Don't pretend like you're not. So that was Andrew Yang's thing about the UBI is that what do we do with all these people? Well, they think in theory, we'll teach them to code, we'll do this. I'm like, hey, but they want to do the kind of jobs they want to work with their hands. These people are not intellectual. Some of them are, but they prefer to do that stuff. You're taking this all away from probably in the end, it's going to probably be like billions of people who have nothing to do. Well, I can tell you that's going to go horribly, horribly wrong. Because if you've read Viktor Frankl's book, Man Search for Meaning. It's a tough read, but it's so important. It's like people need purpose. So this is why often people theorize that UBI fails in the small test groups, because people end up just doing nothing. Because if you don't incentivize purpose,
right?
Like I was listening to an interview with the Spotify guy. I think he's from Sweden. I think it's from Sweden, and I'm lazy. I'm not looking into it. But he was talking about, well, in Sweden, like if you want to sit there for a year and like get paid to do whatever, you can do it. Now, I think he didn't do a very good job explaining it, because it sounds like to me like you can't do nothing. Yeah, they want to see like, are you working on a business while you're getting paid? Right. Are you working on some art? Are you doing something productive? Right. I get the feeling that in Sweden, if you sit around doing nothing, they'll check in on you and what have you done? Okay, go get a job, you bum. Yeah. Versus when they talk about it here, people just don't want to
make that connection.
You can't just be doing nothing.
Right. Yeah.
Like if you want to go bake bread, cool.
Yeah.
But do something. You can't be injecting heroin sitting on your couch playing video games.
Right.
Right. And if you're playing video games for the sake of entertainment and that's useful.
Yeah, if you have a Twitch stream or something.
Then okay, I guess that's something. Is it the most productive? I'm not sure. But you're doing something that's of value to other people.
Right.
But a lot of people in North America culture are going to take that money and do nothing.
Right.
Right. As that's what we found with payments, both in America and here. The way that didn't matter is that a lot of people hate their work, don't like doing it. They're making just as much or equal or more, and they don't want to go back. And now the system is kind of screwed.
Right.
And it's like, okay, like for me, like it was very helpful getting payments.
Right.
I was being productive.
Oh, you mean like for the CERB?
Yeah, for like CERB. But I mean, I wish we didn't shut down. I genuinely don't believe it was necessary. Yeah. For people under 40, at least, conservatively, we just completely. I think it was absurd, but it gave me time. To do stuff, be creative, like the podcast.
Totally. And I mean, and you had brought out ideas like, okay, well, what do I do are there other, small businesses that I can try and kick off or like other revenue streams or whatever. So,
but I know factually a large percentage of people are not going to do that.
Right.
And the idea behind UBI or these people is that everyone is going to go be like, say, me, but I know they're not.
I see. Yeah.
And I think it's delusional.
Right.
That a lot of these people are like, oh, we're just going to phase out all the workers because of automation and all this. And they'll find something to do. It's like, you guys, I have not heard one single plan from any person to address this thing that we all agree is fundamental, which is purpose, and people struggle without it. Right. And none of you have addressed in this new world order, whatever you want to call it, how these people who are now have no purpose are going to function.
Right, yeah. Because like you said, there are folks that do, and it's like, if I've had my head stuck in spreadsheets for like days on end, it's like, I just want to do something dead simple that I'm going to accomplish something. And like, I find reprieve, and it's like, I'm going to go physically build something as well, or I'm going to go outside. So absolutely, like even people that are very cerebral need some of that aspect. But like you said, I don't think that it's a guarantee that everybody that is currently, doing whatever with their hands is going to just continue on.
No, I did.
There are people who will, but it's not a universal.
You'll get huge percentages of people that are like, cool, I'll sit here and drink my beer. Yeah. Like a lot of guys will just get drunk, blow shit up if they have nothing to do. Like, do these intellectuals just not understand that about most of humanity? Yeah. Even smart people, they just do it more creatively with engineering. You still do it. Like, I don't understand why they miss that aspect. Like to me, I'm like, am I the only one who realizes this problem?
I mean, I think it can be like the what was it? There was a thing that you mentioned Google, right? And them just like canning products. There was an article that somebody recently brought out, and they were like a list of all of Google's messaging services, and it was like this long.
I feel like they didn't put any effort into any of that.
They did, but not all of them. But it was like, their start date and their death date. But one of them was Google Buzz, which is something that they literally, it was, I think it basically, it lived for like a few months, but really it was like 4 days. But where they took all of your email contacts, right? And they were like, the people that you interact with most, those are going to be your social network, and we're going to make you follow them. And it was like, it ended up being like a massive information disclosure. There were stories of people that had, a woman that all of a sudden got connected back with her abusive ex-husband that then, so all of those privacy considerations with the folks that were developing this thing, because they don't experience those issues themselves, they had zero clue and just launched this thing, right?
With no thought of what could happen.
So if you're, the thing that came to mind for me here is like, if you're somebody that is personally driven, that is passionate, that you would continue working and doing these things even if you didn't have motivation, then you're not perhaps geared to actually consider that there are people who think differently from yourself.
Yeah. And which is, I actually don't have a problem with cliches because I think that they're very established often, not always, but they're there for a reason.
Sure, yeah, exactly.
And it's like you
There's
need to put yourself in other shoes, and not just even very smart people struggle to do that.
Yeah.
Well, I do it like this. It's like I had someone saying the other day, John, you need more energy. A client or something. It's a friend of mine too, so it's fine. And I'm like, you need to be happier. And I'm like, bro, this is me. I'm actually in a pretty good mood. I made some joke like, if you want super high energetic, like you got to go hire this kind of person. Yeah. I won't specify because publicly they'll get flamed for that. But he thought it was funny. And I'm like, he's like, but you should see me happy. I'm like, listen, I know you're smart enough to know like it's biochemistry. People's levels are different. Yeah. My level, for me to be portrayed as that level of happy for another person, guess what? John knows about himself. I'm unstable at that point.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Because I'm in an addictive and like a dopamine state.
Right.
Which I love being in.
But you know what
but my whole thing is a disaster. I learned that through a manic depressive episode. Like, and historically it was usually to do with women. That's the only thing that ever gets me like that.
Super amped, yeah.
I'm a neutral person emotionally, except anger. That's my emotion. There's a lot of people like that, but like that, just that conversation with this person, like you need to be happier, and I'm like, actually, I'm in a pretty happy place in my life, and for me, this is what it is. And they just like, they had that look, like,
there's a bit of a short circuit going on,
like, or like someone who's like, it has to be like this, and you're like, but does it though?
Right. And I find there's sometimes it's people that, perhaps they haven't had, maybe it's lack of, self-awareness, maybe it's lack of exposure to people that think differently, but I've come across folks where there is actually kind of a level of arrogance that goes about it, is that they're unable to picture that there's a different way of thinking or operating. And I actually, that really can put me off at times if that bleeds into, but you must be like this, or you say this, but I know because I would say this, but actually mean that. I was like, no, I'm just actually telling you. It's like, right now, I don't want you here. Please leave. Yeah. That doesn't mean I'm suffering. Please come and take care of me. It's like, I've made my feelings clear, So, anyway.
Which is, like,
into some personal shit.
Oh, no, that's fine. I get in personal shit all the time. It's just more for you. You don't want to get, for specific reasons, it's too much. Like for me, it's funny. I just thought, like, I made a very inflammatory comment on Facebook recently. I did it on purpose because I was trying to elicit a specific. I said Nazi. I called the government a bunch of Nazis. People got very angry at me, and for me, it's very offensive the way my people reacted to that. Because if I'd said the word communist, who have factually killed more human beings than the Nazis did, even though they did it to my people, they wouldn't have given
reacted
two
in
shits.
The same way.
Oh, the camps, they're not putting people in camps. Blah, blah, blah. How dare you make that comparison? I'm like, more people have died under communists. In fact, people are dying under communism regimes today in camps. Right? So they're making an emotional reaction without understanding the point that mine is about, like, personal freedom. But anyways, off the thing. But the second part of the comment was, if you agree with this, full stop, we can't be friends.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, I'm not interested in being around you as a person, because we're just going to have you're not open-minded, and we're going to have that. What do they interpret it as? Well, why don't you delete me then? It's like, hey, dickheads,
I'm putting it.
This is a social network.
Yeah.
Unless you're harassing me, I'm not the type of person to delete you, because I actually want to see what, even if I think you're a complete moron for your perspective, I want to see what it is, so that I can, wait, am I taking it too far, or am I not taking it too far? Sure. And I'm just like, if you have such a problem with the stuff I'm saying, because it's the same 4 fucking Jews every single goddamn time. It's just unbelievable, these people. They're the ones who jump on me every single time. I'm like, you clearly don't like what I'm saying.
Right.
Why haven't you removed me from your friends list? And I said to them, I'm not a child. Like, I don't need to delete you off of my thing unless you're being obnoxious.
Right.
We have a disagreement. I'll engage with people until I realize
this is not productive.
They're not actually having a conversation. And sometimes you're surprised by it. Like, for example, one person put out a New York Times article saying X. Someone else put out from Science Magazine. The one of the holy grails of publishing scientific articles, and their response was, you're not a doctor, basically implying you don't understand that article. What I'm like, wait, so you have more weight to the New York Times article, which has been factually proven consistently in the last few years to be a bunch of manipulative, lying dickheads pushing narrative. This has been proven. And you put more credence into that. I'm done in the conversation here.
Well, and I think that's the thing, right? There's I think we're approaching things in the same way. That it's good to have exposure to different perspectives. But there's times as well where it's like, this is just, I'm not gaining anything from this because we're not actually engaging with each other in any way that's helpful. It's like there's no point.
Yeah.
So like, why bother?
Yeah, but I think you need this dialogue.
Yeah.
Like if you're a person that I don't agree with, like you said, we don't agree on anything, but we can actually have a conversation about it, then it's productive.
Right. Yeah.
But if you're just gonna scream at each other, like, what bothers me is when like I can pick apart people's arguments from a logical perspective or with some facts. And here's the thing, we have two, as we were discussing previously, there's two completely separate data sets that are saying different things. Who do you believe? The answer is we don't know yet, which is why if both sides, it must be
right.
You're going to run into a problem.
Yeah,
because one side, either there's a middle ground or one side's more correct than the other. Right. But you force it again. Right. You have a problem.
Yeah. So and that's, I mean, like we know we're in a fairly divisive space.
Well, I've been saying quite in class, and I'm like, listen, and it's not about paranoia. It's about I'm just looking at history and human behavior. Yeah. We could be in a very rough next 20 years, right? Yeah. For a variety of reasons, and it does not help that there are certain organizations, mostly the media and certain political organizations globally, that are antagonizing people on purpose. Right. Yeah. Clearly antagonizing and openly getting caught, like the New York Times admitting that they're off the record. They didn't know they're on record, but they were. And we just care about the click rate, so it doesn't really matter what we say. And it's like, oh, I see what you're doing here. Right.
It's like you're placing financial incentives in place in front of things with like real world effects. Right? Yeah. I mean, there was, what was it? Totally a separate example, different space, but similar notion, right? Where there was Bloomberg, right? Obviously, they're heavily embedded in the financial industry. They had a policy that rewarded journalists based on stories that would move markets, right? So if you publish
that's not manipulation,
not at all. So if you published a story that even if it ended up being factually incorrect, if it ended up having market effect, that was a bonus, right? So
just bet on Trump's tweets, Jesus.
Yeah, yeah. So it doesn't matter whether it goes up or down. Anyway. So it's that type of notion where it's like if you are simply extracting this for your own financial benefit, and the more people go through this and the more outrage. I mean, we know that's the standard like social media outrage machine thing, right? Like it's incentivized for engagement, and engagement is higher when things are fraud.
And the sad part is a lot of people haven't picked up on it. Right.
You think that this is a fairly mainstream,
the reason why podcasts have taken off is because you can have real conversations, right? Less manipulated. There's still some, sure. People are naturally drawn to that, but then I meet people who literally only get their news from the mainstream, and I'm like, for example, RT, which is a Russian thing on Facebook, it says state-controlled media. Well, why doesn't the CBC say state-funded media?
Right. Yeah.
Or I mean, I said this the other day, but like CNN, for example, is not technically state funded; it's a private company, so you couldn't actually put that label there. Sure. But if you don't know that they're in bed with the Democrats at this point, right, there's something wrong with you.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, you need to be aware of like where, what potential biases and angles are going to be, and where you're consuming things from, regardless of which side they're playing.
Yeah. So. Yeah. It's fun, but I think. It's been a fairly productive, I guess, conversation as far as exchange of ideas and the discussing the human conditions. All right, some of my podcasts are totally only martial arts. Some of them are this, and I'll go either way. I like both. Yeah, any final thoughts? Are you happy with the discussion? Or?
Yeah, sure. I mean,
what were your expectations?
I don't know. I figured that that we'd come in talking about martial arts, and that I'd probably discuss some things of like the meditation aspect and how those contrasted and were complementary and whatnot. So it was like we kind of went through that. I figured we'd talk about the charity stuff. So
you came in basically. I'm talking about this. So you came in. It was like, oh, okay, that's totally fine. But that's why I like to do like one of the premise of when I first started the podcast. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I thought it would be one thing, and now it's like, who are martial artists or who are interesting people?
Yeah,
and that's really it.
Totally,
you know?
because I think that when you don't, box it in, you're just giving room for people from different places, right? And then making it free form, you're giving people room to talk about whatever they either are passionate about, feel comfortable about, have some exposure to.
Yeah, because I would like more people to get into martial arts. I think it's a phenomenal benefit for everyone, both as a practical if it's self-defense, or even if it's just a martial arts that's more physical, then great.
Yeah.
I think the attitude towards a lot of people have towards martial arts is it's all meatheads. And yes, there are meathead gyms for sure. And I personally don't like those gyms.
Yeah.
I like some level of intellectualness in an environment, but just letting people know that you can find all sorts of people in martial arts, and that don't be scared to come in.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, it's I think that in like my experience in the gym has been that the folks that come in like, super hot and have that type of approach, like more of the meathead type, like I'm here to beat the shit out of people. It's like that they either leave or it settles down.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, they either get tired of me lecturing at them and they leave, or they're just like they want the athletic. Some people need the athletic output, in which case I'm not the best for that, but I'll be like, hey, go stick around and go do jiu-jitsu or something. Like you'll love it.
Yeah. I mean, and the other part is like I like to engage with what you described previously is how I like to approach it. That is like you need to be acquainted with violence and how that functions in order to actually have a proper relationship to it. Not that you're going to be like, just tossing and becoming a more violent and aggressive person, but you need to have a relationship to it. So, that's the same thing with, if we're talking firearms, there's that's a thing in Buddhist thought and philosophy is around, there's a notion called weapon principle, right? Just like if somebody is standing there and like brandishes a sword and holds it a lot high in the sky, like people are going to react in turn. There's a certain energy that happens there. So it's like relating to that. It's like, let's rather actually have a relationship to it than just like shy away. Because then you can actually, relate to it, be informed with how it functions and it as a tool or a thing.
There's my excerpt. I've been starting adding excerpts at the beginning as like a hook.
Oh, the hook, yeah.
Yeah, I have to remember to like find something that's interesting.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good place to stop either way. Cool. So thanks for coming on and taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I enjoyed the conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, appreciate it.
You're listening to The Warrior's Day. Brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga. Turning lambs into lions.